Inside the demon castle, the Demon King's guards were fast asleep. And I mean, forever asleep. This is where our boy, Han Jae-woo, found his target. He smirked right at the Demon King, cause after beating this guy, Jae-woo was about to get filthy rich. Just as he leaped in for the final blow, a system notification pops up. You are being disconnected from the server. The demon, Würzburg, saw his chance and sliced the hero clean in two, back in the real world, at Han Jae-woo's place. These thugs were tearing it apart and they yanked the internet cable right out of his VR pod. When Jae-woo woke up, he was furious. He grabbed the guy by the collar and asked, "Are you ready to die?" The other goons begged Jae-woo to chill. They said they were just trying to help him quit his gaming life. See, our MC used to work for these guys. He was known as the problem solver, and I mean those kinds of problems. He was a genius in school, and he also knew how to blow cash like nobody's business. So the guys had a point. Jae-woo still beat him up, but it was true. He'd spent every last cent on a new VR capsule. He was completely hooked on the game, Savior of Humanity. In this game, the battles feel real, and the open world is almost endless. Forget just magic and combat, you can gain fame, meet beautiful characters, and find out what a VR pod is really for. Even a simple fighter can become a king. That's exactly why Jae-woo took out a 1 billion won loan from these very loan sharks. All to buy this, the Dream Machine. But now they busted into his apartment and stopped him from getting the massive reward that would have paid off his entire debt. Oh, they were going to pay for this. One of the thugs spoke up. "Hey, we're the debt collectors here. We're the ones supposed to be making the threats." Jae-woo just stared him down. "Go ahead. I'd love to see you try." The MC promised them he'd pay up, but when he went to his computer and checked his bank account, he was poorer than all of us combined. The thug said he could just come back to work for them as their personal problem solver, but Jae-woo just looked at his dream machine. He remembered his mission in the game. He refused. He told them to get lost. He'll pay them back, soon, right now. He needs to finish that mission. He logs back into the game and spawns in the main city, but he has a penalty for dying in combat. Death penalty temporarily suspended for 22 hours. Annoyed, Han Jae-woo wonders how he'll make money now, until someone approaches him, remarking, "You seem to be having some difficulties." Seeing a girl approach, the protagonist asks, "Who are you?" The girl introduces herself as Aquila, the game master of Savior of Humanity. Han Jae-woo can't believe a little girl could be the game master, but she tells the protagonist not to judge a book by its cover. However, Han Jae-woo retorts that he can't just believe she's Aquila based on a simple claim. After hearing this, Aquila snaps her fingers, and everyone around them freezes. The protagonist realizes this is a time-stopping spell, at the very least, an SSS rank ability. Aquila clarifies that it's not an ability. She merely temporarily crashed the server. She claims that should be enough for him to believe her word. Anyway, Aquila mentions she's thought of an event for the game's 7th anniversary, asking Han Jae-woo if he's interested in hearing more. Immediately, the system announces a new game world has opened. Aquila tells the protagonist to be the first to clear this world with a new character. Han Jae-woo replies he hasn't finished with his current character, but Aquila reveals the reward will be 25 billion. She adds that she understands if he's too scared to face the challenge. Immediately, Han Jae-woo feels challenged. Aquila says she knows about his search for the game's true ending, claiming he might just find what he needs in this new world. She also reveals an object, stating it holds the clues to reach the game's ending. Han Jae-woo is dazzled by the sight. Aquila says if he tries it now, he'll get a bonus. On his system, Han Jae-woo sees Aquila has sent 30 million won to his account. The girl explains that Han Jae-woo is her VIP, which is why she's sponsoring him. With that, the protagonist says that even if he doesn't clear the game, it'll still be worth it. After all, this amount will cover his interest for the month. He can't refuse the offer. He'd be an idiot to miss out. Aquila says that was expected and will send him to the new map right away. With that, she starts modifying the game using its very programming. But within the game, she seems to be a real deity. As the expansion installation process begins, the entire surrounding scenery starts to change. A short while later, they stand alone before a door. Aquila explains that once he crosses through, Han Jae-woo will be in the new world. The protagonist understands he just needs to go through to enter the new world, so he wastes no time and heads for the door. But before crossing, he tells Aquila not to forget the reward she promised. With that, he steps towards the true ending. Aquila mentions she forgot one small detail. She states that if the protagonist character dies in this world, he dies in real life too. Han Jae-woo is utterly terrified to hear this, but he can't do anything about it as he's already crossed through the door. As soon as he arrives in the new world, he faceplants on the ground. He wonders why he's feeling real pain if this is just a game. Then he remembers what Aquila said and realizes her warning was very real. Therefore, Han Jae-woo concludes he has no choice but to clear the game and not die in the process. But he's absolutely furious at Aquila for tricking him. Starting with a new character, Han Jae-woo has no items to use, not even water to drink. He trudges trudges through an empty forest, blaming Aquila for his predicament. Checking his stats, he realizes his current character is incredibly weak, with barely any health points. Plus, he's been walking for 12 hours straight without water and is severely dehydrated. His goal of beating the game is proving much harder than he imagined. But then, amidst his struggles, he hears the sound of water nearby. Without a second thought, he rushes towards it. By pure chance, Han Jae-woo stumbles upon a stream, comparing the moment to one of Bear Grylls' adventures. At this point, the protagonist barely has the energy left to even hate Aquila. He just wants a drink. However, near the stream he found, Han Jae-woo suddenly spots a woman right in front of him. She's actually bathing in the water. He's left speechless, mouth agape, not even trying to hide his awe at her beauty. He stares at the woman for a while, but as he tries to get a closer look, his system notifies him that he needs to pay for a DLC. Han Jae-woo becomes absolutely furious. Why would a VIP have to pay for DLC? He assumed he'd have full access to the new map. Suddenly, he's surrounded by other women who tell him that to see what lies beyond this point, he has to pay. Drooling, Han Jae-woo asks, "How much?" Moments later, he's captured. After being taken to captivity, a witch calls him a pervert and orders him not to move. She also adds that if he behaves, he'll be allowed to keep his clothes. Han Jae-woo, still fixated on the DLC he didn't buy, asks again, "How much is it?" A man, also captured, looks at him confused. "What are you talking about?" he asks. He introduces himself as Rud, a monster hunter. The protagonist then introduces himself as Valorstead Valor and asks how the hunter ended up there. Rud explains it was pure bad luck. He stopped near the witch's forest while tracking his prey. He then asks if Valorstead also had a stroke of bad luck, and the protagonist confirms it. The hunter laments Valorstead's capture, noting he seems quite young, but Valorstead assures him it's fine, claiming that escaping such situations is his specialty. He even boasts about having a great escape plan. Han Jae-woo realizes that he was the one who wrote the guide on how to defeat these very witches. It took him 3 full days to compile it. He chronicled the 5 witches of Havel: Gunda, Kaldura, Aldaida, Fugul, and Heijuju. Though they're introductory bosses players must overcome, thousands have died fighting them, making them quite infamous. But if you look closely, they're a highly disorganized group. And Han Jae-woo knows that to escape, he must exploit this weakness. So he turns to Lady Fugul and remarks, "It's surprising you're still alive." He recalls hearing Lady Heijuju say she was going to kill her. Fugul flies into a rage at this. She immediately starts turning against her colleague, just as the protagonist knew she would, since he was aware they hated each other. Continuing his provocations, Han Jae-woo adds that Heijuju planned to kill her colleague and take all her possessions. "Is that true?" Fugul demands. Heijuju retorts that her friend shouldn't trust a prisoner's words. She then adds that Fugul couldn't possibly use all the money she'd recently acquired, so she demands a cut. After all, she usually covets her colleague's possessions. Aldaida, who never quite grasps the mood, pipes up, "That must be why Juju is making an acid bomb." Meanwhile, Gunda, with her enormous appetite, asks, "When will the food be ready?" And Kaldura, who loves a good fight, declares, "If there's going to be a brawl, I want in." It doesn't take long for them to start fighting. The protagonist celebrates. His plan worked perfectly. He knows that while the witches are a team in theory, in practice, they're constantly squabbling amongst themselves. Many players lose to the witches because they don't know this secret. But Han Jae-woo, with access to this crucial information, has a significant advantage. With the fight in full swing, he tells Rud, this is the perfect opportunity to escape. But before that, he wants to pull a prank on the witches. So Han Jae-woo literally pulls on them, sending all the witches tumbling into a cauldron. After that, he points out the exit to Rud. Han Jae-woo didn't want to leave without defeating them. After all, even if they're dumb, they give a lot of XP. However, just when he thought he had escaped, Fugul's snake snared his leg. The witch declares she won't die alone and intends to take the protagonist with her. Han Jae-woo had forgotten that his current character is incredibly weak, making it impossible to easily escape the trap. But Rud quickly comes to his aid. He swiftly arms himself and severs the snake. The protagonist thanks him for the help and gets back on his feet. Immediately after, he asks to borrow Rud's bow. Rud hands it over, asking if he's good with bows. Han Jae-woo replies, "I can manage." With that, he shoots an arrow at a jar hanging above the cauldron. When it shatters, the jar spills its entire contents onto the witches below. Heijuju gasps, "This isn't good. That pot contained acid, and when it mixes with the cauldron, it will create a bomb." The witches watch it happen, helpless to do anything. Immediately, a massive explosion erupts in their lair, but Han Jae-woo and Rud manage to escape just in time. Rud asks if that truly finished them off. After checking his system, the protagonist confirms it. Yes, he thinks to himself that it was incredibly lucky, especially since he's still at such a low level. Rud admits he had lost all hope of survival and thanks Han Jae-woo for his help. As a token of gratitude for saving him, he wants to give the protagonist a gift. Han Jae-woo receives Red Dragon fruit cuffs and is overjoyed. He doesn't recall anything like them from his previous journeys. Rud explains they seemed valuable, so he stole them from the witches. Han Jae-woo immediately grabs the items and consumes them all at once. minutes. With that, his system alerts him. He is now a dragon bone possessing immense power. Han Jae-woo watches his stats skyrocket. No normal player would ever dream of getting something like this right off the bat, so he figures his luck must be changing. In a way, Rudd sees potential in the protagonist and invites him to become a hunter. Just like that, the protagonist's system alerts him that he's just unlocked a friendly relationship route with a monster hunter. Even though he liked the invitation, the protagonist declined, stating he already had other plans. Rudd then remarked that he seemed to be a busy young man, but on second thought, Han Jae-woo realized this was an opportunity. His current character had no class. All that massive newly acquired experience had nowhere to go, and it would simply vanish if unused. So he decided he'd try being a hunter. He then asked if 3 months would be enough. Rudd quickly said no, stating it would take at least 3 years, at minimum. After they came to an agreement, Rudd led the protagonist into the forest and told him to hide wherever he pleased. The hunter stated the protagonist had 30 minutes before he'd begin searching for him. Han Jae-woo then realized the hunter possessed a tracking ability, which he used to hunt monsters, but he felt the hunter underestimated him, assuming he was just common prey. After all, Han Jae-woo had explored this forest countless times. He remembered everything, even secret hiding spots. He knew these dense trees confused anyone's sense of direction, plus poisonous spores from toxic mushrooms were scattered everywhere. On top of that, countless ferocious beasts roamed here, far more dangerous than the witches. The protagonist had already faced most of them, and with the newly acquired fruits, his physical abilities were almost maximized. With all this, he was certain the hunter wouldn't find him so easily. But in a short time, Han Jae-woo realized he was wrong. It didn't take long for Rudd to find him. Rudd told the protagonist to try harder. However, he added, due to your passion and effort, I'll give you 10 bonus points. Han Jae-woo asked, how did you find me so quickly? Rudd replied that it had been a while since he'd found such an interesting student. He then told him to do his best from now on. The protagonist's system alerted him. Hunter's hazing quest completed. A new quest, Hunter's taunts, has begun. After spending some time as a hunter, Han Jae-woo learned several new skills. He realized that joining Rudd hadn't been a bad idea at all. 3 months later, he had learned quite a lot. At the camp, Rudd asked if the protagonist had already mastered everything he had taught him. Han Jae-woo replied that if the hunter didn't believe him, he could hide anywhere in the forest. Rudd remarked that the protagonist's spirit always surprised him, so he would do as he said. But, he added, if I don't find you in an hour, you'll have to prepare dinner. Han Jae-woo agreed to the challenge and was eager for what was to come. Sometime later, while hiding, Rudd mused that he had finally found an apprentice with potential. Still, he thought he shouldn't make it too hard. The hunter believed that by hiding on a cliff for an hour, he would easily stay out of his apprentice's sight. However, as he scaled the mountain, Han Jae-woo grabbed the hunter's leg, startling him. After that, Rudd tried to hide among the trees but was quickly found. He tried hiding in multiple spots, yet was discovered every single time. Soon, he wondered, how could someone learn all the techniques he himself took 5 years to master in just 3 months? Rudd tried to hide in a cave. This, he thought, was his last escape route. He was sure he wouldn't be discovered here. After all, it was known as the home of the Hellhound, yet the protagonist surprised him even there. Guardian of humanity. Tip number 1, he remarked, is that not even earthquakes can wake a sleeping hellhound. With that, he asked his master, am I approved? Still surprised, Rudd simply said, yes. Outside the cave, Rudd admitted he hadn't expected such rapid progress. The protagonist, in turn, humbly stated he simply had a good master. Han Jae-woo knew he actually had the aid of his system, but he didn't want to tell Rudd. He let the hunter believe all the credit was his. Even so, Rudd praised his student's performance, saying that besides being talented, he also had an incredible memory. He also admitted he had never met anyone like him before. Therefore, he believed the protagonist would go far. Now that the training was over, Rudd asked if his student would proceed with that task he'd mentioned earlier. Han Jae-woo replied that he first wanted to earn some money, and then continue his journey. Rudd then mentioned having a close friend who worked as a mercenary, asking if the protagonist was interested. This proposal didn't sound too bad to Han Jae-woo at all. It could be a great way to earn some initial income. Plus, he could join for free and have a flexible work schedule. And if he was lucky, he might even encounter the game's guardians. With that, he decided to accept the job. Rudd then handed a mercenary insignia to the protagonist, stating that with it, his friend would accept him immediately. The hunter bid farewell to the protagonist and wished him good luck on his path. Han Jae-woo thought that defeating the witches and gaining a class was a great start to the game. At this rate, a happy ending might not be so far out of reach. Han Jae-woo's ultimate goal was to discover the game's true ending. He remembered he had only accepted Aquila's proposal because she promised to provide clues for the finale. Not only that, but Han Jae-woo believed never knowing when he would die was the true thrill of this game, so he wanted to make the most of that tension. Therefore, he was eager to reunite with Aquila and obtain the game's true ending. Speaking of Aquila, she watched everything from afar, amused as she saw the protagonist on his journey. She just realized that choosing Han Jae-woo as her VIP was absolutely perfect. Amidst this, a woman approached and stated, Han Jae-woo is definitely not an ordinary guy. Aquila playfully asked if her colleague was into him or something? Valfurga replied that she was a goddess. There was no reason to look at a human she was supposed to protect in that manner. Aquila didn't understand why not, as she herself considered Han Jae-woo cute. She also remarked that Valfurga had been very serious lately, remembering a time when she was much more fun. Valfurga scoffed. That was a long time ago. Changing the subject, she asked, "Did you really pay Han Jae-woo's debt?" Aquila confirmed, yes. So Valfurga pressed, then why wasn't Han Jae-woo himself informed? He still believes he's working to pay off that debt. Aquila simply replied that it was fun watching him play so full of life. Valfurga declared Aquila was horrible for doing that. She then asked, "Is Han Jae-woo part of a larger plan, or is he just a toy for you?" Aquila responded, "Han Jae-woo is more like a promising talent." She added, "And I want to keep a very close eye on him." Back to our protagonist, he decided to sit down after his legs began to ache. He complained that this forest was absolutely exhausting. He felt so drained he dreamed of sleeping for 12 hours straight, but he knew he couldn't stop now. The mercenary guild was just ahead. Arriving in Frankfurt, he stepped into the Francois Tavern. Waitresses greeted him warmly. He told them he was looking for someone, and one quickly offered to prepare a table. As Han Jae-woo settled in, he realized this tavern was the perfect spot for information, a classic place full of good food and drinks. He knew people talked more freely when they were happy, making it ideal for learning about the mercenary guild. And besides, he thought the waitresses were pretty cute. Taking advantage of the good service, Han Jae-woo asked if they knew anyone named Rebus Chaltz. The moment he spoke the name, the entire atmosphere shifted. One waitress quickly warned that the name shouldn't be uttered in here. Another added that the man he spoke of was extremely dangerous. Her own boyfriend, she explained, had gotten involved with Rebs Chaltz and returned like a mummy. Others who tangled with him met the same fate. What exactly had Rudd gotten him into? The protagonist wondered. The waitress urged the protagonist to flee while he still could, warning that the dangerous man could appear at any moment. But in her attempt to protect him, she inadvertently pushed him directly into harm's way. Rebes Chaltz spotted the protagonist. Noticing Rudd's insignia, he declared, "You must be the one I've heard about." He added that the timing couldn't be more perfect, as he was just looking for a new companion. Han Jae-woo, however, already knew this was a terrible setup, still wondering why Rudd had put him in such a mess. After a brief conversation with Rebes Chaltz, the protagonist understood he was being taken to the war between the Elector Prince and Pezamut's forces, but Han Jae-woo was no fool. He quickly realized he was actually going to be smuggled as a slave into some foreign army. Instead of fleeing, however, he saw an opportunity here. The Elector Prince was a game guardian, one of Paltz's electors. Through him, Han Jae-woo believed he could gather intel on other guardians. Moments later, a trumpet blared. "This is the perfect time!" Rebes Chaltz exclaimed. "The prince has finally arrived!" As the cavalry passed before them, Rebes Chaltz remarked that he'd fit right in working with them. The protagonist, however, found this very different from what he expected. Seeing the Elector Prince, he thought the man looked a lot like a villain. But the biggest surprise came when Han Jae-woo saw who accompanied the prince, Lady Valpurgis herself, by his side. The prince looked at her, asking if something was wrong, as she seemed quite distracted. The lady replied there was nothing to worry about. With that, they headed to the battlefield. Valpurgis had been his battle companion in his previous playthroughs. He regretted never being able to save her in times of danger. Every single time, things ended the same way, with her perishing. Rebus Chaltz noticed his discomfort and asked, "Is something bothering you?" Han Jae-woo said no, but in his thoughts he vowed, "This time, even if I have to risk my life, I will find an ending where Valpurgis survives." Sometime later, they reached the training grounds. Watching the others, the protagonist concluded it was pretty intense. Rebes explained they were selecting group leaders through combat, and there was money on the line too. Pride and money. Two things that definitely motivated the protagonist. But he figured all he needed was to contact the Elector Prince. Staying out of the spotlight was the best course of action. Rebes, however, wanted him in the trials no matter what. Rudd wouldn't have sent him, he argued, if he didn't believe in his potential. So he asked his men if anyone wanted to fight the newcomer. Immediately, several volunteered to challenge the protagonist, leaving him cornered with no way to refuse. So, since he had to fight, he decided he couldn't afford to lose, even if it meant using his power. His opponent introduced himself as Max. He scoffed at the protagonist, claiming that with such a scrawny body, one hit would be enough to defeat him. "Both sides ready for combat?" Rebes asked. With their confirmation, he started the fight. Max lunged at the protagonist, but with a single blow, he was disarmed. To the surprise of all his allies, Han Jae-woo won the fight with just one strike. It left the others dumbfounded. Max was one of their strongest after all. But to the protagonist's surprise, this didn't scare the others off. In fact, it only made them more eager to challenge him. Han Jae-woo definitely didn't want this, but he ended up being challenged by practically every single mercenary. So he had no choice but to defeat them one by one, using the opportunity to improve his attributes. Then, one of them introduced himself as Charlotte. "Unlike the others," he boasted, "I won't be embarrassed by a newcomer." He approached the protagonist, scoffing at his size. Han Jae-woo thought it best to stop for now, but he discovered the hard way. The option to log out of the game wasn't available. He knew this was Aquila's doing. He just wanted to rest for a few minutes before continuing, but that option was gone. With no other choice, he would have to face his opponent. Since there was nowhere to run, he concluded, it was better to do this right. So Han Jae-woo executed a judo throw on his opponent, taking the big man down instantly. Even after knocking Charlotte out, Han Jae-woo thought he was pretty heavy. Seeing Charlotte defeated impressed even the mercenary leader. The others became incredibly curious about the protagonist's strength, and they wanted to find out by fighting him, much to Han Jae-woo's dismay. Reeves, in turn, told the others to back away from the newcomer. Han Jae-woo rejoiced, thinking he'd finally get some rest. But then Reeves declared the protagonist was the chosen one, naming him Valorstead Valor, the new group leader for the upcoming battle. After that, the mercenary group prepared for war, with the protagonist leading them at the guild leader's command. A chaotic battlefield. Reeves commands his army to attack. Immediately, the mercenaries charge their enemies. But on the other side, an army of trolls glares back. Han Jae-woo wastes no time. He dives straight into the fray, attacking relentlessly. He believes he's now aligned with the Elector Prince's forces. Reeves had explained the conflict was against Demon King Pizamit's orc army. Their mission? Simple. Steal the enemy commander's military flag. Once their forces broke through the enemy formation, they would exploit the opening, then collapse the enemy's defensive lines. But Reeves had warned his men. Orcs are incredibly proud and strong with excellent coordination. Reeves told Valorstead Valor that his job was to lead their group and halt the enemy's advance. Back on the battlefield, the protagonist finds it ridiculous that he has to lead a mercenary group. After all, he had other plans in mind: earn some military merit, then make his escape. A short while later, an orc approaches his captain, reporting that their spearmen are being butchered. The captain refuses to believe it, insisting his spearmen are elite warriors. He grabs a spyglass to see for himself, but as he surveys the battlefield, he's startled by the mercenary group, led by the protagonist. The captain orders his soldiers to form lines, to align their muskets. Then, they open fire on the humans. Han Jae-woo muses that using muskets isn't a very efficient strategy. They take too long to reload and need frequent alternation. The moment the enemies switch their firing line, the protagonist declares, now's the time to attack. With his group, he charges, trampling over the enemies. One orc can't believe his soldiers are being annihilated by such a weak human, but regardless, he knows he must stop the human advance. After all, he holds the flag bearing his tribe's proud history. The orc carrying the flag stood no chance. In the end, the mercenary group emerged victorious. The protagonist captured the banner for his group. He knows he just needs to hold on a little longer to earn the military merit he craves. Suddenly, an ally approaches with a problem. The rest of the army is retreating instead of advancing. Not only that, but orc reinforcements have just arrived. The protagonist panics. He thought victory was right within reach, and he can't understand why the others fled. One of his men asks, "What do we do now?" The entire group is surrounded and lost. On the orc side, the hidden chief, the great general Kallion, commands the brave human warriors to give up the fight. He declares that if they retreat now and leave the flag behind, he will honor their courage and spare their lives. The protagonist retorts that an orc's word means nothing to him. He'll put their banner to good use. Furious, Kallion roars, "How dare you attempt to tarnish our sacred flag?" Han Jae-woo declares that there are no rules in war. To achieve victory, he and his men are prepared for anything. With that, the protagonist successfully provokes the enemy. The orcs immediately fall into formation, and Kallion orders them to fire. The humans are at a disadvantage amidst the barrage of fire. The protagonist's system warns him. His intimidation attempt failed. But Han Jae-woo doesn't understand why. It always worked in previous games. Regardless, he and his group are now under enemy fire. His men are losing faith in victory. The enemy has a famous general, and they don't believe they can tank someone as strong as General Kallion. Even the protagonist finds himself lost in the situation. Then, he has a sudden flash of previous battles. He remembers that if he dies here, it's game over in real life too. Han Jae-woo is in shock, overwhelmed by the information. To make matters worse, his men plead with their leader for an order, otherwise they'll all perish. Instead, the protagonist suddenly starts laughing, making his men believe he's completely lost his mind. But Han Jae-woo calls for Charlotte's trumpet. His ally points out that no reinforcements will come, even with the trumpet's sound. Yet, the protagonist insists he knows what he's doing. So, he blows the trumpet with all his might. An ally remarks that it's the opposite direction from where their allies retreated. Han Jae-woo replies that he knows and tells his allies to keep blocking the shots. Meanwhile, he thinks, if Aquila has any honor, she won't abandon him now. After all, he's a VIP. On the enemy side, the orc general orders his spearmen to advance. Suddenly, an enemy warrior charges the humans. He aims his spear at the protagonist, but before he can strike, the enemy is hit. Then, someone else approaches the battle. Valpurgis arrives, mounted on a unicorn. She heard the trumpet's call and motivates the humans to keep fighting. The warrior tells all the soldiers not to lower their swords. This battle isn't over yet. The orc leader tells his soldiers not to interfere. He declares that this is the Countess of Niederbayern, and the fight has now become a duel between nobles. Valpurgis tells the general he is honest but unworthy. She immediately attacks her opponent, second, and an intense battle between them begins. The protagonist watches the fight, utterly mesmerized. Even though Valpurgis is in the early stages of the story, she's already incredibly strong at this point. Back in the fight, the orc is struggling. Valpurgis isn't holding back on her opponent. She strikes harder and harder, but the orc is incredibly resilient. Her opponent comments that the Countess doesn't just have excellent swordsmanship, he also praises her hand-to-hand combat skills. He suggests that the Countess must be Valpurgis' sister, as her military order would make sense. Valpurgis claims she serves God with all her heart, adding that she dislikes wasting time. Then she attacks her opponent once more. The orc general enjoys the fight more and more, striking intensely, aiming to hit her. However, Valpurgis is much faster than him. She manages to dodge the enemy's blow and counterattack. After that, the orc declares it was a great fight. Immediately afterward, he falls defeated to the ground. His men realize they've lost the battle and retreat, carrying their defeated captain with them. The protagonist is utterly impressed that such a powerful captain was defeated by a single blow. He realizes this must be the true power of Lady Valpurgis. Valpurgis approaches him, asking, "Are you the leader of the mercenaries?" She says she felt his courage from afar, then formally introduces herself. The protagonist introduces himself as Valorstead Valor and greets her. He tells her that if Valpurgis hadn't shown up, they would all be dead. In his thoughts, however, he concludes that he's no longer playing his Steel Elector character, so he needs to be careful. Then, the protagonist's group approaches, telling him they have something for him. They hand the enemy's banner to Valorstead Valor. After all, he's the leader. This immediately boosts the protagonist's credibility among the mercenaries. Han Jae-woo recalls the intense battle that just took place, and realizing he barely escaped, he celebrates and raises the banner, declaring it belongs to him. Sometime later, at Francois' tavern, a little girl appears looking for Charlotte. He's completely charmed by her. The girl sees his injuries and asks, "Did you go to another war?" Curious, the protagonist asks, "Is this Charlotte's daughter?" But one of the mercenaries says no, stating this is Charlotte's 15-year-old younger sister, Baptiste. The girl then scolds the protagonist, claiming her brother got hurt because of him, and demands he pay for Charlotte's doctor. Charlotte, in turn, says that thanks to their leader, they all returned alive. All the others confirm the story, asserting that their leader saved them all from being devoured by orcs. The protagonist is utterly embarrassed and tells them to just eat in silence. Just then, Valpurgis enters the tavern, instantly drawing everyone's attention. Han Jae-woo is completely taken by surprise. He certainly didn't expect to see the Countess there. Sometime later, she takes the protagonist to the advanced base of Harfheim. Valpurgis explains that the Steel Elector himself requested his presence, apparently wishing to bestow military honors upon him. She tells the protagonist this is incredible, as it's the highest possible honor for a mercenary. Han Jae-woo thinks Valpurgis is different from what he remembers. She seems more excited about the honor than he is. The Countess says these are soldiers who were saved due to the protagonist's efforts, and if it weren't for his bravery, none of them would have survived. Not only that, but these are citizens of the Empire who are alive thanks to him. That's why she's so happy. This unlocks an old memory for the protagonist, a memory where Valpurgis protected him in an unusual situation. He realizes she hasn't changed, only their relationship is different. After all, in this character, he's just a mercenary, and she's a noble. Valpurgis then approaches His Majesty and introduces the protagonist. The Steel Elector says he's pleased to finally meet the acclaimed Valor, introducing himself simply as Philip. Han Jae-woo bows to the noble, thinking that the presence of a true guardian is incredibly intense. Philip states that the protagonist has become known as the Death of the Field. He declares the protagonist's courage incredible, his bravery like a lion's. A man like that must be rewarded. With that, he announces he'll give the mercenary companions about 100 florins, and for the protagonist, 300 florins. Han Jae-woo says that one day he will repay such generosity, but he adds that he has a request. He would like to regroup with his companions and rest in Wittenbayr. Despite Wittenbayr being far, Philip will allow it, and also grants a vacant shed for the protagonist to use as he wishes. Furthermore, he asks if the protagonist needs anything else. Han Jae-woo thinks he would normally reply no, but faced with this unexpected situation, he glances at Valpurgis and gets an idea. He then says he has a personal question for His Majesty. Philip tells him to voice his doubt. So the protagonist asks, what does the Steel Elector truly think about this war? Philip takes a moment to answer the question, and a silence falls over the room. As Han Jae-woo expected, everyone was confused. After all, he's just a mere mercenary. Philip in turn returns the question to the protagonist. Han Jae-woo says his vision is limited, but there's one thing that truly catches his attention. One of the nobles present asks if he thinks he's good enough to give advice on the war just because he earned a military merit. Another noble also chimes in, alleging that the protagonist must have only heard some gossip and worried for nothing. However, hearing this, Valpurgis speaks up in favor of the protagonist. She says it's not right to judge a book by its cover, then recommends His Majesty listen to what the young mercenary has to say. Philip's uncle calls Valpurgis audacious for speaking to his nephew like that, but Philip himself states that Valpurgis is the niece of the Elector of Bayern, so he should show more respect for the Countess. As the protagonist expected, expected, even the Elector of Steel cannot ignore Valpurgis. Philip then agrees to hear the mercenary. "And what is your vision of the war?" he asks. Han Jae-woo states that an ambush is coming. Philip in turn asks how the mercenary can claim such a thing. Han Jae-woo explains that Demon King Pizamut's main strategy has always involved ambushes and betrayals. Considering the 10-year war with the Toe Kingdom and the 6-year battle against Margrave Anhat, in both cases, Philip's tactics proved decisive. Given this, the protagonist asserts that being careful about betrayals and the like is never too much. Philip is troubled by these words. He then asks, "Are you claiming there's a traitor among us?" Han Jae-woo says he's only considering the possibility and believes it doesn't hurt to be cautious. Philip agrees with this statement, adding that the mercenary is quite bold. Irritated, he retorts that the mercenary's head is only still attached because he allowed it. Therefore, he tells the protagonist to know his place. Valpurgis attempts to interfere on the protagonist's behalf. However, Han Jae-woo himself backs down. He apologizes for his error, then requests permission to withdraw from the noble's presence. As he leaves, Han Jae-woo thinks that the Elector of Steel used to be more prudent, but this time he was arrogant, and Han Jae-woo doesn't understand why. The only thing he knows for sure is that something is wrong this time. First, the red dragon fruits, which normally appear much later, arrived early. Added to that, Valpurgis, who should also have appeared later, arrived sooner than expected. With this, the protagonist concludes that everything is different than before. Amidst his thoughts, Valpurgis calls out to him. She had run to catch up with him. "My, you walk quite fast," she says. Han Jae-woo then asks if Valpurgis ran after him because she was worried. She says yes, apologizing for Philip's words. Furthermore, she offers to help him with anything. With so much goodwill coming from the Countess, Han Jae-woo feels a little embarrassed. He falls deep into thought about her saying she'd do anything for him, letting his imagination soar, but at the same time, he knows it will never happen. So he asks her for something else, a quill and a pistol. Valpurgis asks, "Is that really all you want? I don't usually make myself available like this for just anyone." Han Jae-woo says his dream is to become a knight, and he intends to use the requested items to learn how to ride. With this, Valpurgis says she's never seen anyone as good as him before. She also adds that this isn't the place to talk about such things, so she decides to take him somewhere more private. Seeing Lady Valpurgis behave so cheerfully makes the protagonist's eyes light up with joy. Sometime later, on the battlefield of Harfheim Peak, the Elector of Steel's army stands before the soldiers of Demon King Pezamut. Philip tells the enemy, "Today is the day I will kill you." However, Pizamut scoffs at his adversary. One of his allies approaches, stating that war preparations have been completed. He also takes the opportunity to say that using that woman might not be a good idea, but the Demon Lord disagrees. His ally argues that this woman is too cruel. If they capture the Elector, he'll be a valuable hostage. Therefore, they can't entrust someone like that to a lunatic. The Demon Lord claims he knows this and says he will take all precautions. Speaking of the woman, she presents herself, approaching her lord. He says his servant does good work, but asks her to go easy. She replies that she always knows how far she can go. However, the Demon Lord says that's not true. Even so, she insists that she has never gone over the line until now. At this, the Demon Lord thinks that's true. He doesn't even want to imagine her truly stepping out of line. Back to our protagonist, he's training with his horse, Philly. His name is Philly, and he's incredibly fast. Considering he's a dueling horse, Han Jae-woo concludes that Philly is quite fitting for the young lady of House Bayern, and she even gave him a very expensive potion that completely regenerates anyone who drinks it. Suddenly, an explosion startles the protagonist. He exclaims that they've already begun, and he needs to hurry. He understands that in this critical situation, there's still a real possibility that Philip could be betrayed. Because Philip ignored the warnings, he's about to discover the hard way that his uncle is a traitor, secretly allied with the enemy. The uncle scoffs, telling Philip he simply doesn't understand. He claims his nephew has been conspiring, turning the rebels against the emperor. As soon as he noticed this, he decided to cooperate with Peksamut. Therefore, the Steel Elector is the true traitor. After this explanation, the old man asks his nephew, "Do you understand?" Philip in turn scoffs, "No one will believe such a senseless lie." However, the Demon Lord smashes Philip to the ground, telling him not to be so rebellious. He calls him a lunatic for not accepting reality. After that, he orders his servants to apprehend his opponent. Frightened, Philip cries out that he's a noble, and no one should dare approach him. As the enemy tries to capture him, Valpurgis approaches stealthily, but she makes her presence known, immediately striking the Demon Lord with a powerful kick. She's not alone either, and orders her soldiers to escort His Majesty away from danger. The enemy grows furious, seeing his prisoner escaping. He immediately orders Hexax to go after Philip. She had been toying with other prey, but now she's commanded to begin her real work at once. Hexax grins, telling her zombie dogs, it's dinner time. Since they're already famished, she barely needs to motivate them. A short time later, the dogs charge out to hunt, and the protagonist suddenly finds himself face to face with them. He figures the enemy would use zombie dogs. He knows Hexax uses them to suppress her enemy's strength, slowly devouring them bit by bit. Han Jae-woo finds this tactic absolutely despicable, but he knows how Hexax fights. Since he hasn't encountered many dogs, he realizes the rest must have gone after Philip. The protagonist couldn't care less about the noble's integrity. His only concern is Valpurgis. So, to help her, he rushes directly toward her. Not far from there, Philip and Valpurgis are fleeing from the dogs. Philip complains that his mana control is terrible, blaming the enemy for it. After all, only the Demon Lord could pull off a trick like this. Mid-flight, a dog lunges, almost striking Philip, but Valpurgis intercepts the creature just in time. Her speed against their enemies proves efficient once again. Concerned for his majesty, she wants to ensure his safety, warning him, "We are in demon territory, so we must exercise the utmost caution." Suddenly, one of Philip's allies is struck. He immediately begs his majesty for help, yet Philip does nothing to assist him. Valpurgis tries to intervene, but Philip abruptly cuts her off, telling her to just leave him behind and keep moving. Dissatisfied, Valpurgis declares she's no different from anyone else. Her life isn't worth more than theirs. Furthermore, she believes a noble's duty is to protect their subjects, not abandon them. She thinks if Philip had only listened to Valor, none of this would be happening. She also blames herself for not being able to help. Amidst her distress, Valpurgis is suddenly captured. Hexax smirks, remarking on how unpredictable they are. The Countess even cries out for his majesty's help. However, upon seeing his ally captured by the enemy, Philip decides to flee instead of trying to help. He abandons Valpurgis as if she meant absolutely nothing to him. With a gasp, Valpurgis realizes she's been deceived. Someone like Philip doesn't deserve the title of Elector. Meanwhile, Hexax kept attacking, smiling as she watched her target suffer. Suddenly, she heard a gunshot nearby. One of her hounds had been hit. Seizing her distraction, the protagonist attacked, landing a powerful punch on Hexax. Valpurgis, seeing the mercenary Valor appear for her rescue, was utterly surprised. She never expected him here. Still, she rejoiced at his presence, calling him a hero. Then she fainted, collapsing to the ground. The protagonist carefully moved Valpurgis to a relatively safe spot. He knew he could only get her out once he defeated the demon's servant. Hexax, in turn, thought the protagonist killed one of her hounds and arrived so stealthily she didn't even notice him. She concluded he was no ordinary warrior. Han Jae-woo then told Hexax, "You haven't changed a bit." Hexax, puzzled, asked, "Where do we know each other from?" He simply replied that he'd never forget her villainous face. Hexax commented on his weapon. "Pretty cool, good range too. But you better aim straight or my whip will get you." The protagonist wasted no time and fired. However, he only hit the enemy's cape. Hexax quickly tried to ensnare him with her whip, ending up lassoing the protagonist by the neck. Leaving him unable to move, she pulled him close and headbutted him. The blow was so powerful it sent him flying. Excited, Hexax declared, "It's not over yet," but when she tried to hit him again, she missed. After dodging, the protagonist tried to attack her from a distance, but the enemy spotted his strategy. She tried to stop him from shooting, but she missed every whip strike. She couldn't believe it was possible. No one had ever done that before. She prided herself on being the best with a whip and thought it impossible for anyone to dodge her strikes until now. Han Jae-woo prepared to fire, but Hexax swore she wouldn't give him an opening. Yet again, her opponent surprised her. Instead of shooting, he closed the distance, enough to stab her with a dagger. After the strike, Han Jae-woo sarcastically asked, "How do you like my dagger, Hexax?" Hexax realized her focus on his gun had cost her an eye. She needed to recover fast, so she unfurled her demonic wings. "I'd love to stay and fight," she declared, "but I'll have to postpone this for another time." Han Jae-woo seized the chance to taunt her. "Running away, are we? Afraid to lose?" Hexax scoffed. "I won't fall for your provocations. Close quarters combat isn't my strong suit, and I know it." But the protagonist pointed out, "I have a weapon too! I can attack from a distance!" The demon's servant boasted she could easily dodge bullets. Yet, as she tried to concentrate, she realized her sense of distance was utterly unbalanced. She'd lost an eye, after all. When Han Jae-woo fired, he hit her dead on. "To kill a bat," he remarked, "the most efficient way is a direct shot." Watching her get hit, he smirked. "Hexax, you're finally getting a taste of suffering. But now what kind of loot will you drop when I finish you off?" Desperate, Hexax tried to seduce him to avoid death, but she hadn't accounted for the protagonist's cold heart. Her attempt to charm him fell completely flat. The protagonist gained some good items from the victory and was pleased, but he knew he had to act fast before it was too late. He grabbed a healing potion and rushed to his friend, knowing only something like that could save her in her critical state. The protagonist carefully analyzes the potion's instructions before using it. He realizes it must be applied directly to the affected area, but to do that, he'd have to remove Valpurgis's armor. He tries to clear his thoughts, asserting that he's only doing this to help her and nothing more. He really concentrates, determined not to make any mistakes. At that moment, Han Jae-woo has a vivid memory of his past. His father died of an illness when he was young, and his mother collapsed from overwork. Because of this, Han Jae-woo lived alone by the time he was 18. At 22, he found a job as a debt collector in Hanam-dong. Though he tried to play tough, he often went easy on those who owed money. Then he met a client who made a living playing video games. This client claimed that by completing a major mission, he'd earn enough to pay off his debt. Curious curious, Han Jae-woo asked more about the game. The young man told him all about the incredible universe the game offered, even mentioning the beautiful characters who were better than real-life women. He explained it was an RPG like any other, but it stood out because it had thousands of players worldwide and actually paid top players for completing difficult missions. Han Jae-woo found it hard to believe you could earn money just by playing video games, so the guy invited him to try it out. Han Jae-woo initially said he was too busy, but then he received a message canceling an appointment, suddenly freeing up his schedule. Soon after, he logged into the game for the very first time. After using the virtual reality capsule for the first time, he was utterly impressed by the realism of the technology. The people on the street seemed so real, making him question if he was even in a game. He noticed a street vendor and found the man incredibly lifelike. He decided to touch the NPC's face to see just how real it was, but the vendor immediately reprimanded him, claiming he only served those with money for his fruit. Immediately, Han Jae-woo encountered the system for the first time, which alerted him to his current money, 10 florins. He figured he'd better go do something else. But then, a little boy appeared, wanting an apple. His mother, however, had no money. Han Jae-woo asked the vendor the price of the fruit, which was 1 florin. He bought the apple and gave it to the boy. The child's mother thanked him, saying he didn't need to spend money on her son. This interaction helped the protagonist understand that 1 florin was equivalent to a day's meal. He said goodbye to the boy and his mother, which brought back a memory from his own past. Walking around with his mother, always eyeing the roasted chicken sold near their house. Gradually, Han Jae-woo became enchanted with the game, and after that day, he never stopped playing. When real life got tough, he used the game as therapy. He spent more and more time in the game, leaving real life behind. There, he could unleash all the stress from his job on the enemies he faced within the game, while in real life, he just woke up and worked. In the game, he found a new way to live. He spent the last 5 years playing. At a certain point, Han Jae-woo was approached within the game and met Duchess Valpurgis for the first time. She said she'd heard of his skills and invited him to hunt wild boars. He mentioned he was actually looking for meat, and she appeared just in time. It didn't take long for the protagonist to capture the boar. While Valpurgis admired his abilities, he was incredulous that she hadn't done anything. Valpurgis simply stated he was so strong that she didn't even need to act, then invited him to form a duo. Han Jae-woo asked if it was some kind of contract where he'd have to work for her all day. Valpurgis said no and asked, "Don't you trust me?" The protagonist replied that he didn't trust people in general, which she found amusing. She then decided to recommend him to become a knight of the Empire. It didn't take long for this to become a reality. Even knowing his potential, Valpurgis herself was impressed that he had come so far, so quickly. After all, he became the Elector of Steel. Han Jae-woo said he hadn't gotten there alone, and if he hadn't met her, he never would have achieved such a feat. Valpurgis replied that these people were saved by him, and peace came with it. With this, he earned the loyalty of the people, and not only that, but he also earned Valpurgis's loyalty. Valpurgis always admired the Elector of Steel. Back in the present, Valpurgis's thoughts about the protagonist haven't changed. Even though reality is different, she feels something special for him. She says that despite his youth, she's never seen someone with such dedication. Then she asks, "What motivates you?" The protagonist replies that he loves this world and everything around it, aside from his face being all beaten up. Valpurgis somewhat understands, but argues he shouldn't have removed her armor, even though he claimed he couldn't help her without doing so. Changing the subject, Valpurgis says they need to go to Valpurga Convent soon, as the others need to know they're still alive. She promises that when they return, she'll repay his kindness. After all, he saved her life, so she feels she owes him more than just words. Even after being beaten up, Han Jae-woo secretly thinks he can't wait for that to happen. Innocently, Valpurgis mentions that besides her, the convent will probably reward valor, but despite that, he says, her reward interests him more. Sometime later, they arrive at Valpurga Convent. Valpurgis introduces her guest to Angela, but the nun says she cannot permit his presence, claiming the convent is in isolation. Therefore, Valorstead Valor cannot enter. In a tavern near Rheinfelden, Han Jae-woo was deep in thought about recent events. He considered asking the Valpurgis convent for the Angel's Heart, an ancient artifact passed down for hundreds of years, revered as an S-rank holy item. Blessed by the goddess herself, it possessed the incredible power to return souls to their users. Essentially, anyone who held this item would have a second life. Han Jae-woo desperately wanted it. It would prove incredibly useful on his journey. Lost in his contemplations, Valpurgis suddenly appeared in his room. She apologized for entering without warning, but seemed baffled to find him hanging upside down. Han Jae-woo simply explained that he found it helped him think more clearly. Valpurgis then revealed she had something confidential to tell him, but first she made the protagonist promise he wouldn't tell anyone. Satisfied she could trust him, she began. Valpurgis confessed that the High Abbess had fallen into ruin. Han Jae-woo was confused, having just spoken with Angela, but his friend clarified that the current High Abbess was Margareta. She also suspected there was a traitor among them, likely an action orchestrated by Pezamut. However, what truly shocked the protagonist was the revelation that Margareta was still alive, a possibility he hadn't even considered. Margareta was an unparalleled figure figure in the guardianship of humanity, capable of subduing even a low-rank demon king. She was an icon of strength. Furthermore, she had transformed the Valpurgis convent into a formidable military force. At this, the protagonist abruptly stood up, declaring he needed to save her. Startled, Valpurgis asked what was wrong. Han Jae-woo insisted they had to find the High Abbess, and Valpurgis, claiming to know darkness better than anyone, agreed to accompany him. A short while later, in the convent's office, Angela listened to Valpurgis's plan. Valpurgis vouched for the protagonist, urging Angela to trust him this time. However, Angela didn't seem to like the idea one bit. Han Jae-woo quickly deduced that Valpurgis had told the abbess everything about him, which explained her apprehension. Suddenly, Angela approached them, startling both of them. She declared there was a traitor among them, making it unwise to trust a stranger. She further asserted that this stranger was not worthy of being there, ordering Valpurgis to escort him out. Han Jae-woo quickly defended himself, stating his concern for the High Abbess, but Angela coldly told him it was a matter he shouldn't concern himself with. Undeterred, Han Jae-woo revealed he had already read the Gospel of the Seven Demons. Angela was stunned, unable to comprehend how that was possible, as it was a book written by Saint Anthony himself. The protagonist explained that the book detailed many things, containing everything about the seven demons sealed and banished from this world, including death, one of darkness's most violent forces. Angela warned that merely speaking these names aloud increased the probability of terrible things happening, making it even harder to discuss the subject. Even so, Han Jae-woo pleaded with her to trust him, claiming to know exactly how to repel the darkness. With no other alternative, Angela agreed, on one condition: the protagonist must keep everything a secret. If she ever discovered he'd breathed a word of this, she swore to make him go to hell and back. Soon after, the protagonist was led to a secret location. A profoundly unpleasant smell assailed his senses. He recognized it from Angela's desk, but here, it was far worse. The protagonist had never seen Margarita's face before, but he'd heard legends of her capable of leg pressing a ton on each side. Valpurgis, noticing his apprehension, offered him comfort. Han Jae-woo then asked if his friend intended to develop a physique as strong as the other nuns. She replied that she did, but her uncle's disapproval forced her to hold back during training. As they arrived at their destination, Angela warned that the demonic energy within was powerful, making it easy to lose one's sanity. She instructed the others to wait outside. When she opened the door, the protagonist felt an incredibly strong energy exuding from within. Valpurgis mentioned she was protected by the goddess's blessing, but worried about the protagonist. Han Jae-woo assured her he was fine. His system had granted him protection, so he believed he could continue. Angela then announced that this was the High Abbess's chamber. Upon seeing her, the protagonist was utterly astounded. He had never imagined Margarita would look like this. He immediately questioned how someone with such a fragile appearance could possibly perform exercises with tons of weight. Angela sternly told him to take this seriously. She explained that they had done everything in their power for Margarita, and in the end, they were forced to rely on a mercenary. Despite her dislike for the idea, she stated that the protagonist was their last hope. She also promised to pay whatever price he asked, provided he saved the High Abbess. Han Jae-woo agreed to help, but first he asked the nun to release him. He then declared Margarita's condition was critical. As a saint, her rate of darkness consumption was double that of an ordinary person. The black veins on her neck were proof of that. Still, he affirmed, there was a way to save her. Desperate, Angela asked how they would accomplish it. The protagonist told her to try and stay calm. After a pause, he revealed the process was quite simple. All they needed to do was use the convent's divine relic on Margarita. Angela faces the High Abbess, asking if the protagonist is referring to the angel's heart. Her understanding is that the dark curse associated with the High Abbess will be transferred to another person to absorb. However, since divine power and curses are opposites, the High Abbess's death would be inevitable during the transfer. This is why the angel's heart is needed. The protagonist confirms that's exactly right. The curse is fatal to all clerics, so no one from the convent could perform this method. That's why he's here. But Angela states that this method won't be possible. The abbess herself said this was her darkness, and no one should suffer in her place. The protagonist offers to be the curse's receptacle, but Angela disagrees. She asserts they're dealing with a dark curse, and with unknown causes and symptoms, it's incomprehensible. She doesn't believe anyone would survive it. What's more, after being possessed, the protagonist would have to live with it for the rest of his life. Valpurgis agrees with Angela, saying there's no reason for him to sacrifice his life in the High Abbess's stead. Han Jae-woo thanks them for their concern, but insists this is the best option. He's read the Gospel of the Seven Demons and knows darkness well. Since he's not a cleric, he's not vulnerable to it. Besides, he's just an outsider. Angela shouldn't worry about his well-being, but rather about her High Abbess. Angela is finally convinced, but says that when the High Abbess wakes, she'll surely scold her for this decision. Nevertheless, she presents the angel's heart to the protagonist. After taking the artifact, Han Jae-woo considers saving it for later, but realizes this is the perfect opportunity to make Margarita an ally. Valpurgis tries to convince him to change his mind about this plan, but Angela reassures her, saying the protagonist is a man and just wants wants to see what's coming. Ready to begin, the protagonist starts the ritual. He places his hand on Margareta and utters some magical words. A short time later, he starts to feel the curse's effects. Not only him, but even Angela and Valpurgis, though distant, perceive the manifestation of evil all around them. In turn, the protagonist is transported to another dimension. Looking around, he realizes everything is dark, but he knows he must find the source of the darkness. Amidst this, a voice manifests, asking, "Who dares disturb me?" The protagonist introduces himself as Valorstead Valor and declares he's there to free Margareta. The voice scoffs, saying a mere mortal can't do that. It adds that he must be insane to confront someone so much more powerful. Then it commands him to vanish from its sight, but to the enemy's surprise, it can't extract the protagonist's soul and doesn't understand why. In turn, Han Jae-woo tells the dark being to release Margareta immediately and use him as its new receptacle. However, the enemy retorts that it won't take orders from a mere human. Besides, it usually consumes souls, it doesn't free them. Han Jae-woo thinks the enemy is playing dirty, so he'll have to do the same. With that, he declares he's read the Gospel of the Seven Demons. He even traded his dog for the book with the Death Smasher itself, and that entity is probably selling cheap copies to other sages right now. Therefore, Han Jae-woo asserts that if the enemy keeps prolonging this, all its intimate secrets will be revealed. The protagonist's provocation worked. The enemy agreed to the exchange, but proposed a condition. Immediately, a quest appears in the protagonist's system. Kill all the Demon Kings supported by destructive death, but he doesn't think he can handle it, so he decides to negotiate a better condition with the enemy, claiming to be too weak for the requested task. Instead of negotiating, the shadowy being decided to share a bit of its dark power, enough for the protagonist to complete the task. Frightened, Han Jae-woo thinks he's going to die. He exclaims this wasn't the agreement they made, but the enemy says nothing in this world comes for free. To wield great power, he must pay a great price. The protagonist feels immense pain during the process, and despite receiving a huge upgrade, he dies. However, sometime later, back at the convent, he wakes up startled in a bed, realizing he's alive. He immediately remembers the artifact he was using, and through it, he's been given a second chance. With that, the protagonist celebrates. With his new abilities, he'll be the king of necromancy, able to command a legion of the undead. Not only that, but he's the only player with such abilities. It didn't take long for him to reach the #1 spot on the game's leaderboard. This way, he believes he'll finally get the recognition he deserves. In the midst of his celebration, Valpurgis appears for a visit. Crying, she says she heard his voice and is surprised to see him awake. Valpurgis explains that after the ritual, he fell unconscious, so she brought him to her own room. Now that he's okay, Valpurgis tells the protagonist never to do anything like that again. She was worried sick. The protagonist takes his friend's hand and apologizes for making her worry. He also promises not to do anything like that again. With that, his friend accepts his apologies. But both of them notice something happening outside. Han Jae-woo arrives, worried, and asks, "What's going on?" Angela realizes he's finally awake, but she adds that he wasn't the only one to awaken. He then realizes who's causing all the commotion. Margareta declares she's been asleep for too long and now needs to exercise a bit. She also says she's happy to finally meet the one who saved her. Then she formally introduces herself as Margareta, the High Abbess of Valpurga Convent, and, as he already knows, her name is Margareta, but he can call her Mari. After the introductions, they headed to a basement. Han Jae-woo figured Philip must have already left the dense forest by now. Having finally achieved the highest necromancer level, Cold Blood, Han Jae-woo had planned to secretly eliminate Philip. But without the Angel's Heart, Philip, being a guardian, made the chances of success low. He concluded he couldn't let his guard down until the very end, even though Margareta was super excited for a new adventure. Seeing her enthusiasm, Angela told Margareta to act with a bit more decency, but the High Abbess just shot back that Angela's age was making her cranky. Even Han Jae-woo found Margareta's exaggerated behavior a little strange, but Valpurgis assured him, "She's always been like this." Han Jae-woo noted that a girl like Margareta was the youngest and strongest military force in the convent, so he expected more dignified conduct. Noticing the two of them chatting, Margareta chimed in, "You two seem pretty close." Then she explained that behind the door was Valpurga's underground armory, filled with all sorts of equipment. She added that many items weren't just combat tools, they were magical too. A mercenary like him would put them to good use. Han Jae-woo thanked her for the access, and Margareta immediately replied, "You can repay me by taking me on a date." Angela was furious to hear this, even with Margareta claiming there was nothing wrong with it. "Anyway," she said, opening the door. With the right gear, Han Jae-woo thought, Philip wouldn't stand a chance. Sometime later, Han Jae-woo headed to the stable to meet his horse. Now that he was properly equipped, he couldn't wait to face Philip. But as he prepared to leave, Valpurgis appeared. "Were you really planning to go without saying goodbye?" she asked, inviting him for one last ride together. Along the way, Valpurgis said that even though they had only recently met, she felt as if she'd known him for an eternity. She reminded him of all he'd done, fighting beside her against the orcs, saving her life during Hexax's ambush, and not to mention rescuing the High abbess. Because of all this, she felt an immense sense of gratitude. After a moment, she asked, "Do you have any curiosities?" Han Jae-woo, feigning ignorance, replied, "What are you talking about?" Valpurgis scoffed, "Don't play coy. I know you're curious about what my face looks like without the helmet." Han Jae-woo admitted that because she always wore a helmet, he'd assumed there was a special reason for it and thought it best not to ask. Valpurgis revealed that beneath her helmet was a large scar, a mark of a curse. Even she didn't know what curse it was, only that her uncle had spent her whole life telling her people should never find out, encouraging her to hide the mark. "But even so," she sighed, "some people call me the ugly knight without knowing the story behind my helmet." She then declared that even though she showed her face to no one, she would make an exception for him. Valpurgis was nervous. She didn't usually do this. However, as soon as she removed her helmet, Han Jae-woo saw her face for the first time. "So, what do you think of my appearance?" Valpurgis asked, a little shy after finally removing her helmet. "Say something!" Han Jae-woo was completely stunned. He apologized, then quickly blurted out, "You're very beautiful." He thought back to how even the Countess hadn't revealed her face before, which was why he was so shocked. Valpurgis then said she had something to give him. She handed over the Bayern's family treasure, passed down to her by her uncle. "Why am I getting something so valuable?" Han Jae-woo asked. Valpurgis explained, "This is a token. As long as you possess this item, I'll always be with you." Han Jae-woo was flattered by the gift, realizing Valpurgis wanted him to always remember her. "I'll take good care of this treasure," he promised. "That's a promise," his friend said with a smile. With that, Han Jae-woo said goodbye, explaining he needed to leave. He offered, "You can go first if you want." Valpurgis returned the courtesy, telling him to go ahead. They stood there for a moment, playfully insisting, before finally bidding each other a definitive farewell. Sometime later, Han Jae-woo reflected on everything that had happened. He mused that a romantic route with Valpurgis wouldn't be such a bad idea, but his thoughts were quickly interrupted. He caught a horrible stench and realized he was standing before several fallen warriors. Judging by the scene, he deduced that Philip and Petsamut had fought right there. Han Jae-woo knew he was on the right track. He cast a spell to perform a complete scan of the area and ended up discovering something very interesting. With a surge of power, he activated a necromancer ability, causing all the fallen bodies to rise and become his loyal servants. "Your first mission," Han Jae-woo commanded, "is to search the surroundings for any traces of Philip." He then pointed to a female servant. "And you," he said, "have a special task. Bring me all the scattered military uniforms. They will be of great use." In a town not far from the battlefield, Philip was with some of his men. He still hadn't overcome his uncle's betrayal and sought revenge. After a moment, he grabbed some food, even as his soldier reminded him it was for emergencies. The prince didn't care. His selfish instincts made him think only of himself. Then, in the midst of it all, someone appeared, claiming they had been looking for him. The protagonist introduced himself as the mercenary, Valorstead Valor. "Do you remember me, Prince?" he asked. Philip recognized him immediately, even as his soldier urged caution, warning that they were in a dangerous situation. Annoyed at being interrupted, the prince struck the soldier. He claimed this mercenary had come to rescue him after all. He'd hired him before. "Worms like you are not as useful as Valorstead," Philip sneered. "And now that I have a war hero mercenary by my side, I don't need any of you anymore. You're dismissed." Philip then ran towards the protagonist, practically begging to be rescued. Han Jae-woo said he was happy to have found him, as he'd searched the entire forest for his majesty. Philip wept with joy, promising to reward the mercenary handsomely once they returned. But Han Jae-woo simply replied, "That won't be necessary." Immediately, his undead servants attacked Philip's soldiers. Philip didn't understand why this was happening. "I'm not here for rewards," the protagonist declared, his voice chilling. "I'm here to settle a score with you, Prince." Philip is caught completely by surprise. He claims a mere cub doesn't know how to fear a tiger, and that he'd been raising a mongrel all this time. The protagonist not only accepts the provocation, but even mimics a dog, openly mocking the prince. Enraged, Philip draws his moonlit blade and attacks some of the undead. Han Jae-woo had expected the prince wouldn't fall without a fight, but he knows that the more allies Philip summons, the less mana he'll have, so he orders his undead to retreat. Philip boasts that defeating the minions wasn't so difficult. However, the protagonist claims that with him, the fight will be entirely different. He even says he has something special reserved just for the prince. Immediately, the two clash in battle. The prince's eyes are blazing with fury, enraged by the betrayal. On the other hand, the protagonist is facing an opponent for whom he has meticulously prepared. Han Jae-woo muses that this is the electoral sword. Facing the very sword style he himself once wielded and admired is a painful experience. While it may appear elegant and beautiful, its retro flair hides a deadly counterattack, always lurking. Only the one who holds the title of Steel Elector has the right to wield this blade. Philip demands, "Do you honestly think you can stab me in the back and still live in peace?" Han Jae-woo calmly replies that, in fact, he's quite friendly with the nuns. The prince is surprised that a mere mercenary mercenary has such powerful connections, but he quickly asserts that he has absolutely no fear of militant religious groups like the nuns. Philip attacks the protagonist again. However, Han Jae-woo defends himself with ease, only further fueling the prince's rage. Not only that, but he's also reminded of all the internal injuries he suffered during his last encounter with the vampire demon. Han Jae-woo, for his part, tells Philip, "Your melodrama ends now." Immediately after, the protagonist lands a powerful kick on his adversary. The blow is so forceful that it sends the prince spitting blood. Han Jae-woo declares that Philip should truly fear him, not the nuns. The prince stammers that his body is weakened from his previous battle, which is why he's losing. He even reminds Han Jae-woo that he once recognized his talent and rewarded him, so why is he trying to kill him now? Han Jae-woo retorts that the prince is even dumber than he imagined, but since Philip still doesn't understand, he'll explain. First, he ignored Han Jae-woo's warning that he would be betrayed by someone close to him. Second, he heartlessly discarded Valpurgis, even after she served him so faithfully. And third, he selfishly allowed countless others to die in his place. For these reasons, the protagonist asserts that Philip should be ashamed to bear the title of Elector. In this dire situation, Philip desperately claims that everything he did was for his people. "Who will feed the remaining citizens if I die?" he demands. Furthermore, he insists that his absence will be a golden opportunity for the other electors, who will surely seize the chance to attack the moment they learn of his demise. The protagonist admits that the prince has raised an interesting point, and so he'll grant him a chance. He adds that if Philip accepts his offer, he will bestow upon him a healing potion. Desperate, Philip quickly agrees, "I'll accept any condition as long as I live." With that, the protagonist commands Philip, "Get on your knees and beg for Valpurgis's forgiveness." The prince readily agrees, even promising to donate 10,000 florins to the House of Bayern. The protagonist then hands over the potion, instructing him to drink it all. Philip takes a sip from the vial, but then lets the rest of it fall to the ground. Sarcastically, Han Jae-woo asks, "Didn't you like the taste?" Then he reveals, "That wasn't a healing potion at all. It was dragon poison." Realizing he's been tricked, Philip's face contorts in fury. The protagonist tells him to thank Hexax, as he took the poison directly from her personal stock. In a desperate act, Philip tries to attack the protagonist, but he's struck down before he can even land a blow. And it wasn't the protagonist who hit him, it was an old ally. Philip recognizes Piffenheim upon seeing her again, but he's utterly shocked. During their last encounter, she was being devoured by zombie dogs. Piffenheim explains that after being left for dead, her new master brought her back and granted her a new opportunity. Now, she says, nothing ties her to the prince anymore. She admits she never liked his arrogance anyway, and the time has come for Philip to pay for all the sins he's committed. Just before Philip dies, the protagonist's system warns that the absence of the Iron Elector could disrupt the game's progression. Han Jae-woo can't understand how such a repugnant individual could be so vital to the game. Nevertheless, he doesn't even consider letting him live, reasoning he can find a solution later. So he authorizes Piffenheim to proceed with her revenge. As warned, the system immediately emits several error alerts. Even knowing the path ahead will be more difficult, the protagonist has no regrets. From high above, Aquila observes everything unfolding in the game. She notes that the protagonist has indeed broken a seal. Judging by his expression, Han Jae-woo is incredibly confident and exhilarated. Aquila loves this, and she wants to see him cause even more destruction in the game. After all, she asserts, this is only the beginning. Han Jae-woo thought, as expected from an Elector, the rewards for defeating Philip are incredible. What's more, he received 2 exclusive S-class abilities as a level-up reward, but when it came to item drops, he only got 1 object. Judging by its appearance, it looked like a normal magic amulet. Yet, when he tried to analyze it further, the item emitted a barrier. With that, Han Jae-woo decided it would be best to take the item to Margareta and ask her to unlock it for him. Afterwards, his system pinged with a notification, alerting him about a transcendent being. In other words, he knew he'd have to be extremely careful when hunting it down. Han Jae-woo himself aspired to become a transcendent being someday. To achieve this, he needed to defeat powerful opponents, using them as stepping stones to reach his ultimate goals. Just then, Piffenheim appeared, announcing she had something important for her master. She had examined the traces left by Philip's men and found an item. "This must be the mission's main reward," Han Jae-woo mused. "The glow alone is on another level." Afterward, he asked, "Did you also take care of the other matter?" As instructed, Piffenheim had dressed Philip's men in Pizza Mutt faction clothes, perfectly disguising them all as demons. In the midst of it all, one man was begging for his life, promising to do anything not to die. Han Jae-woo didn't recognize him until Piffenheim informed him that this was one of Philip's surviving allies. "So, master, what should we do with this fellow?" she asked. Seeing Philip's soldier weeping like a baby, Han Jae-woo declared, "I'll send a present to Pezimut. I hope he likes it." Sometime after Han Jae-woo departed, Lawrence, captain of an army fleet, walked through the area. He soon spotted several fallen bodies. "These are Pezimut soldiers, sir," one of his men confirmed. They also reported finding a survivor from Philip's team. Lawrence questioned the survivor, learning that both the prince and his valuable item had been taken. The survivor claimed they were forced to disperse after a Pisamet attack, only to be cornered during their escape. But Lawrence's eyes narrowed. "Are you telling me you're the only survivor from an attack that wiped out every other soldier?" Startled, the survivor stammered a yes and tried to explain himself. However, Lawrence merely sighed, expressing regret that he hadn't arrived sooner to find Philip. He told the survivor he had risked his life to protect his superiors, honoring the knight's code. With a booming voice, Lawrence addressed his entire troop. "This survivor," he declared, "honored his commander until the very end. Even in the face of danger, he maintained an unbreakable knightly spirit. He is an example to us all. Now we must go after Prince Philip." Sometime later, at the Palace of Roses, Lawrence presented himself, reporting he had been searching for Philip. But he'd only found a few clues, and no sign of the prince's whereabouts. His superior guessed he hadn't found the item either. After all, Philip wouldn't abandon something so important. Lawrence immediately blamed Pisamut. Roland commented, "That name is becoming tiresome." The captain apologized, but Rose asserted that finding the item was paramount. She added that the item was the only way to restore Prince Philip to his elector status. Roland stated, "Philip isn't someone who would die so easily." She then ordered her servant to send a message to Pisamut, demanding he return the item. Otherwise, she grinned, what comes next will be fun. At Pisamut's base, he received a message. He was instantly terrified. The madwoman had been resurrected. The woman he referred to was Margareta. She was someone even a demon like Pisamut feared. After all, he was responsible for the curse that had left her in a coma. His servant argued she was merely human, but Pisamut vehemently disagreed. "Margareta invaded Off's hideout alone," he snarled, "and defeated all his subordinates. And she did it cruelly. But the worst part was that she did it after one of Off's men stepped on her snack." After that incident, Margareta became known among demons as the Destructive Storm. Another of Pisamut's servants appeared, announcing, "A message just arrived from Queen Roland. Now is a terrible time for this," Pisamut grumbled. He already had enough on his mind. But as he read the letter, he couldn't understand what Roland was talking about. He had no idea what item she was referring to. With that, Pisamut went ballistic. Now he had a lunatic on his tail, demanding something he didn't even know existed. Pisamut's servant tried to deduce why Roland would assume they had the item. After all, they hadn't taken anything, and had even lost Hexax while pursuing Philip. This all seems suspicious, the servant mused. Margareta's resurrection, the sudden disappearance of this item, everything has a final result, but the cause remains vague. With that, the servant began to consider the possibility of a mastermind tying all these events together. In a way, he wasn't wrong. He just hadn't discovered yet that Han Jae-woo was behind these schemes. Speaking of which, Han Jae-woo sneezed and his ally asked, "Are you catching a cold?" "No," he replied. "I just smelled something strange." As they walked, Piffenheim showed curiosity about what her master would do with Philip's body. Han Jae-woo hadn't decided yet, as he was preoccupied with something else entirely. After all, he now held the Golden Imperial document. With that, and Philip's body, he believed he could accomplish many great things. He confidently asserted, "Now, I control the world." Piffenheim was delighted for her master, wishing him a long and prosperous life. Sometime later, a group of friends was heading home. They'd even planned to drink until they dropped at the first tavern they found. They were ready to party. However, an arrow suddenly struck one of the men, ruining their plans. The other man watched his friend fall, but he was powerless. A group of bandits had ambushed their carriage, emerging from the forest, but the attacked group wouldn't go down without a fight. They wanted vengeance for their fallen friend. A battle quickly erupted. The bandit leader sneered, claiming the merchants were profiting handsomely by reselling goods to Roland. The merchant retorted that the bandit had no idea who he was messing with, but the bandit didn't care. He disarmed the merchant, cornering him. Then he taunted him, saying he could run to Valpurgis for help, and if he really wanted, he could bring her uncle too. Speaking of Valpurgis, she was having a private moment with our protagonist, Han Jae-woo. She noticed a smudge on his face, leaning in to wipe it away. Suddenly, Margareta burst in, frantically looking for him. Her abrupt entrance startled both of them, but even Margareta herself was shocked. For the first time, she saw Valpurgis's face without her helmet. After calming down and taking a drink of water, Margareta declared she nearly had a heart attack seeing Valpurgis's bare face. She added that such a beautiful face made her heart race. The High Abbess then warned Han Jae-woo to take good care of Valpurgis, telling him not to mess things up with a girl like her. Otherwise, she threatened to tear him in half. Changing the subject, Margareta wanted to know more about Philip's death. Han Jae-woo explained that after defeating him, he'd left the prince's body in his subordinate's custody. However, Margareta insisted that Philip being dead was a problem. She wanted to be the one to finish him. Seeing the abbess's fury, Han Jae-woo silently thought it was probably better Philip died before he ever met. To calm Margareta down, Han Jae-woo told her he had a gift. He revealed a pouch full of money, explaining it had belonged to the prince, but now it was hers. He added that with so much money, she could buy all the food her heart desired. Margareta immediately called Han Jae-woo a saint of compassion, declaring herself even more enchanted by him. Meanwhile, Valpurgis spotted a stack of papers and, intrigued, intrigued, asked what they were. Reading their contents, she realized they were letters to Philip, Roland's plans to make him the next emperor. Han Jae-woo explained that the current emperor's relationship with Roland was strained due to fiscal issues. Margareta added that economic blockades were also in play. She clarified the emperor was seizing goods from all merchant guilds linked to Roland. This was driving nearby cavalry units absolutely mad. That's why House Ritter attacked the Ignis Merchant Guild. Because of all this, Margareta revealed, Valpurgis was under immense mental stress. Valpurgis, however, hadn't wanted Han Jae-woo to know any of this, but Han Jae-woo pressed, "What's happening?" With no other choice, his friend agreed to tell him everything. Sometime later, Han Jae-woo realized just how tangled this whole mess had become. He never imagined the Emperor's economic blockade would escalate into a massive confrontation with the Elector of Bayern. Lost in thought, Valpurgis arrived for a visit. She told him she wished he'd forget what he'd heard earlier. She didn't want to drag him into her family's troubles. However, Han Jae-woo declared he couldn't ignore it. He wanted to help Valpurgis with whatever she needed. Even so, she insisted the situation was far too big for him to get involved. She'd seek help from other allies, she assured him. He shouldn't worry. Even though he knew Valpurgis was reliable, Han Jae-woo felt she still lacked experience, and her heart was far too soft. So he tried to comfort his friend. He said he understood the situation was too big for a mere mercenary. But even so, he refused to stand aside. He wanted to help her no matter what. After all, he claimed, mercenaries could be useful in their own way. His friend brightened, appreciating his ability to make jokes even in a tense moment. Regardless, Han Jae-woo declared he was feeling quite confident. Valpurgis, in turn, didn't quite understand what he meant. The next day, Han Jae-woo woke up exceptionally early. He walked directly to the convent, heading straight for Margarita's chambers. He burst in abruptly, finding her in the middle of a meal, which caused Margareta to nearly choke on her food. Han Jae-woo didn't want to wait any longer. He revealed he possessed a magical item he'd taken from Philip, but he couldn't open it. Stoking the High Abbess's curiosity, he told her if she could open it right away, she'd receive a reward. Without a second thought, Margareta immediately agreed to open the item. A short while later, the protagonist spots a pair of gloves and asks Margareta what they're for. Margareta explains they're an improved version of the magic zipper she just opened. Now, with just a flick of her palm, she can spawn items whenever she wants. After stepping away, Han Jae-woo admits he's never seen anything like it before, wondering if the game received some kind of update. He doesn't think it's a bad thing. Quite the opposite, in fact. But his thoughts are abruptly cut short when he tries to take a drink of water. "Why did you stop riding out of nowhere?" he asks his horse, puzzled. Then, the protagonist realizes he's arrived in the city of Pluzin, and it's currently in the middle of a massive festival. After pushing through the crowd, Han Jae-woo finally lets out a cheer. He feels like he's been walking through Disney for 3 hours, but he's finally escaped the overwhelming throng. Suddenly, amidst all the chaos, he spots someone holding a welcome sign. The protagonist thinks this place is exactly as he remembers it. He sees people eagerly awaiting the arrival of someone they're calling the Great One. Han Jae-woo muses that Pluzin is a city where many different races coexist, and the Great One they're referring to is none other than the Demon King Kubalt. Kubalt played a crucial role in unifying cultures through his vast knowledge and eloquence. He's considered the primary pro-human Demon King after Roland, and he's also a vital figure who can help with the current situation. Therefore, Han Jae-woo is determined to find him, no matter the cost. Lost in his thoughts, an individual approaches the protagonist, declaring he possesses the aura of a great adventurer. "Even without knowing you, I can sense your strength from afar," the stranger proclaims. Han Jae-woo decides to check his system to understand what the goblin is talking about. He then notices that he possesses an SS rank, worthy of a great leader, with one of his abilities specifically being a strong influence over even strangers. With this realization, Han Jae-woo states his desire is to meet Kubalt. The goblin, clearly thrilled, exclaims, "It's exciting to know the city will receive 2 powerful visitors simultaneously." He adds that he also has business with Kubalt and will gladly guide the protagonist to him. A short while later, they arrive at Kubalt's castle. The goblin tells the protagonist to wait and enjoy some tea in the reception area while he announces his presence. Meanwhile, the protagonist finds it odd that a mere goblin could recognize his level just by looking at him, but he decides not to worry about it for now. In the middle of the room, he spots a statue of the owner, and a fleeting thought crosses his mind. Perhaps I'll have to hunt him down soon. Moments later, the goblin returns, asking, "Is the adventurer enjoying his tea?" The protagonist replies that he is, but sternly tells the goblin to announce his presence next time he approaches. Changing the subject, Han Jae-woo then asks how the goblin began working for Kubalt. The goblin responds that his relationship with Kubalt is one of inestimable love. As Han Jae-woo ponders this, he recalls that everyone in the city refers to Kubalt as the Great One. Yet this goblin and speaks of him with far less formality. Then, he spots a ring on the goblin's finger and asks, "Are you married?" The goblin chuckles, saying the protagonist has a good eye, and claims he invested 10 years of his salary to purchase this very item. Han Jae-woo, in turn, calls the goblin by his true name, Kubalt. He then declares it took him too long to notice the act. He points out that this is the ruby ring Kubalt cherishes so much, and the goblin's overly familiar attitude when they first met only fueled his suspicions. But above all else, Han Jae-woo states that the goblin was the only one who didn't refer to Kubalt as the Great One. Realizing he'd been discovered, Kubalt had no choice but to reveal himself. In his true form, Kubalt acknowledges, "I know I stand before the famous Valorstedt Valor." Formally introducing himself, Kubalt declares, "I am the law of Plusen City." He then adds that the protagonist has likely sought him out to discuss the matter involving Valpurgis. Han Jae-woo confirms this, stating he hopes to extract crucial clues or information from Kubalt. The castle's owner admits he's hesitant about helping, but he asserts that if the protagonist meets a certain condition, he will provide all the information he needs. Han Jae-woo already anticipated Kubalt would propose something like this, so he immediately asks, what would that condition be? Even before hearing the answer, the protagonist knows that Kubalt's obsession with knowledge has been obvious since previous chapters. Han Jae-woo possesses unique intel on half of the future wars, and even information regarding real estate speculation. Naturally, he's eager to know what Kubalt will demand. However, to his complete surprise, Kubalt's request is simple: to be friends with Valorstedt Valor. Kubalt explains that Valor has recently become the center of attention, especially after subduing Hexax. Not only that, but he's also grown quite close to the Empire's most famous paladin, with rumors even swirling about a romance between Valor and Valpurgis. For all these reasons, Kubalt wants to be connected to Valor, knowing it could prove useful in the future. In response, the protagonist asks, "Why should I be your friend?" Kubalt then hands an item to Valor, explaining, "This is a communication ring. Through this item, we'll be able to communicate over long distances." Most the protagonist doesn't think it's a good idea to be friends with someone like him. However, Kubalt declares that in the name of their good friendship, he would provide all the information Valor needs. As proof of his sincerity, he reveals a crucial lead, a clue hidden in the capital of the Duchy of Saxon. The capital of the Electorate of Saxon, of course, is named Dresden. Following Kubalt's tip, the protagonist travels to Dresden. Guards attempt to block his entry into the city, but he simply flashes his system screen, leaving the soldiers utterly terrified. With a stern look, Han Jae-woo warns them not to try and stand in his way again. Once inside, he walks through the streets with his system screen brazenly displayed for all to see. Upon witnessing this, people immediately drop to their knees before him, terrified of being attacked or worse. Han Jae-woo thinks to himself, "It's never been this easy to reach an objective." In no time, he reaches the Merchants Guild. Inside, a woman announces, "An unknown individual is approaching the guild, and he appears to be extremely dangerous." However, the protagonist steps into the building, startling the woman with his displayed system screen. After this, he finds himself face to face with the guild leader. The leader promptly asks, "Why would someone like you come here?" Han Jae-woo closes his system window, then states, "My desire is to make a deal with the leader of the Merchants Guild." Kubalt had previously explained what he knew about Dresden to the protagonist. He mentioned that Velia's Merchant Guild and the city's Ritter-Knight family were trapped in massive debt, caught in a serious debtor-creditor relationship. The protagonist had no idea about this kind of information. As expected, Kubalt was incredibly well informed. After all, he was the man who had outmaneuvered the protagonist in information warfare countless times in the past. His intelligence network stretched across the entire continent, earning Kubalt the title of King of Shadows. Judging by the protagonist's expression, Kubalt noted that he seemed satisfied with this information. However, Kubalt still had something more to reveal. Back in the present, Han Jae-woo stood with the leader of the Merchant Guild. The guild leader introduced his daughter, Marin, to the protagonist, explaining that she now spent her days confined to her bed. Not long ago, Marin was a normal child, but one day she lost all strength in her arms, unable to even lift a fork. It wasn't long before her entire body followed suit. Her father hired the best doctors in the city, and even outside experts, but no solution proved effective. Ever since watching his daughter in such a state, he lamented not seeing her healthy as before. Even so, like any good father, he hadn't lost hope of helping her. He then implored the admirable adventurer to do something to help his daughter. First, the protagonist told the guild leader to simply call him Valor from now on. He then explained that the purpose of his visit was to strike a deal. Now, judging Marin's situation, Valor realized her condition was truly critical. She had suffered significant muscle loss, and her body was severely malnourished. He concluded that the girl couldn't be treated with traditional medical methods. But the good news is he knows a method to cure her. The father immediately asked what he needed to do. Han Jae-woo replied that he needed an elixir from Gross Glockner. However, the girl's father said this made saving his daughter practically impossible, clearly showing he knew exactly what kind of place Gross Glockner was. That's why he deemed it impossible to get what the protagonist requested. Gross Glockner is a canyon located in the southeastern part of the empire. Despite its breathtaking landscapes, it's most famous for being home to the fearsome demonic dragon known as Schwarze Teufel. While few ancient dragons remain on the continent, Schwarze Teufel possesses immeasurable power. Not even demon kings dare challenge him. The canyon he rules is infested with countless beasts and demons. Simply put, it's a deadly place for both humans and demons, making it a hopeless challenge for ordinary people. However, the protagonist was no ordinary person. He reassured the merchant guild leader about this, stating he would go after the elixir himself. This ignited a flame of hope in the man's heart. At the same time, he worried, believing no one could return alive from Gross Glockner. Yet, Han Jae-woo added that what Marine needed most right now wasn't the elixir, but rather her father's love. Moved, the girl's father asked why Valor was helping him. Han Jae-woo explained that he'd heard about the Ritter family's debt to the merchant guild. In exchange for helping Marin, he wished for the girl's father to forgive that debt. The guild leader was stunned by the offer, but his daughter's future was at stake. Just the thought of seeing her healthy again meant he couldn't even consider refusing. So he promised he would honor the agreement once his daughter was cured. Sometime later, the protagonist arrived at Gross Glockner. He remarked on how he enjoyed the view of the moon and the climate. Looking down, he spotted some rare plants on the ground. He noted that unique medicines could be crafted from flowers like these. Then, he instructed his horse not to eat the plants. Gross Glockner was so treacherous that guards were stationed all around to prevent people from entering. But the protagonist managed to convince them to grant him entry, and no one else. He knew that even the grass of this place was bathed in dragon mana, and almost everything there could be used for medicinal purposes. In other words, even the very soil of this place could be considered gold. Without wasting time, the protagonist collected everything he saw as a potential remedy. Besides curing the guildmaster's daughter, he imagined he could sell some of these items and earn a decent profit. Plus, he could keep some items for himself and use them in his battles. But amidst his harvesting, Han Jae-woo was suddenly struck on the head by a stone. From the other side, a goblin approached, ordering him to leave this place. Not only that, but the goblin was accompanied by an entire army, declaring that this place did not belong to humans. Sometime later, under Han Jae-woo's watchful eye, the goblins were hard at work tilling the land. But when he spotted a goblin doing it wrong, the protagonist sharply reprimanded him. "Dig properly," he commanded. "I don't want the plant roots damaged. If you keep working so sloppily, I'll send you all back to your graves." Han Jae-woo, clearly annoyed, then asked, "Did you all hear me clearly?" Earlier, before all this happened, the protagonist had been attacked by these very goblins, but he simply used his abilities to drain the enemy's blood, effortlessly defeating them all with a single strike. Even in death, however, the goblins still had their uses. Han Jae-woo once again employed his skills, breathing life back into their corpses and swiftly creating an army of zombie goblins. This way, he wouldn't have to cultivate the plants all by himself. Back in the present, Han Jae-woo mused, "You really shouldn't have attacked when you had no chance of winning, Kururak, should you?" His servant, Kururak, humbly replied that the goblins had failed to recognize Han Jae-woo's true majesty, but thanked him for taking them in as servants. The protagonist chuckled, saying that he was the one who should be grateful, as the goblins were working so diligently. Changing the subject, he asked, "Who else lives in these canyons besides goblins?" Kururak quickly listed, "In this canyon, besides goblins, there are countless other monsters, werewolves, worms, giant centipedes, and many ogres too." Han Jae-woo noted that his new servant had memorized everything, proclaiming it a wise decision to keep him by his side. Kururak declared it an honor to serve him. Suddenly, the protagonist heard a voice coming from his ring. On the other end, Kubalt asked if he'd forgotten the ring was a communication channel. Han Jae-woo confirmed, "Yes, I did. What do you want to talk about?" The Demon King inquired, "How are things going in Gross Glockner?" Han Jae-woo replied, "The water's fine, the breeze is fresh, and the moonlight is beautiful." Kubalt mentioned that the city of Pluzin was also buzzing, preparing for the upcoming festival, and invited the protagonist to join if he had time. "But what I really wanted to say," Kubalt continued, "is that Valpurgis recently visited Ritter. Just as Valor had predicted, they demanded an absurd settlement fee. They also threatened to confiscate the goods meant for trade with Roland. In short, it was all unilateral and incredibly unfair. The protagonist declared they had gone far beyond the limit. Kubalt, however, warned that this was only the beginning. He truly wished Valpurgis would act more reasonably, but Han Jae-woo argued she would never accept those terms. He urged Kubalt to buy them some time. Kubalt agreed to do as Valor asked, in the name of their friendship. With that, the protagonist promised to reward him for this favor when they met again. The Demon King seemed pleased. After all, Gross Glockner was a true gold mine, so he expected a suitable gift. Then, noting the background noise, he said Valor clearly had a lot of work ahead, so he wouldn't bother him any further. Han Jae-woo felt relieved that Kubalt had finally hung up. He was only tolerating him for Valpurgis's sake after all. But just when the protagonist thought he might finally get some rest, Kururak approached him. "We have a problem," he announced. Han Jae-woo then noticed the arrival of several monsters. A pack of ogres had decided to give him a welcome. With that, the protagonist told Kururak to step back. He realized the goblins he'd been controlling had already been slaughtered. Not only that, but upon analyzing the ogres, he noted his blood absorption technique wouldn't work on them, and summoning the goblins again was out of the question. They were no match for ogres. Therefore, Han Jae-woo concluded he would have to get his hands dirty. He channeled his magical abilities and invoked Rublanya, one of the Empire's 12 legendary swords, also known as the unbreakable treasure of House Paltz. The ogre's demeanor immediately shifted at the sight of the blade. The protagonist declared, "They recognize my weapon, of course. Rublanya is known for illuminating the darkness after all." He even called Philip a fool for possessing such a thing and having no idea of its power. But now, properly equipped, the protagonist attacked. After striking the first ogre, Han Jae-woo closed in, attempting to encircle the others. He moved so swiftly that his enemies couldn't even follow his movements. He not only attacked unseen but also toyed with his opponents, and before the ogres could react, Han Jae-woo struck them down, giving them no room for a counterattack. Afterward, he mused that before the fight he wasn't sure if he could even use this technique, but now, seeing the results, he silently praised his own performance. Not only was he impressed, but his new servant also found his performance incredible. The protagonist merely stated that this was nothing compared to when he was at his peak. But then, just moments later, he was surprised. A creature suddenly attacked him, demanding, "What do you think you're doing?" Han Jae-woo wondered, where did that come from? But before he could even form a thought, the creature had him in its grasp. Enraged, it snarled, "I'm going to snap your neck." The protagonist finally came face to face with an enemy of equal power. Not only that, but his opponent immediately threw him away. Taking the hit, Han Jae-woo realized he wasn't dealing with just anyone. A single blow had reduced his life by 10%. The enemy remarked, "You're strong. Who are you?" Han Jae-woo shot back, "You should introduce yourself first." With a smirk, she claimed, "I am the master of Gross Glockner." Han Jae-woo's eyes widened. "The demon dragon?" he questioned. He hadn't expected her to look like this, imagining something more akin to a classic dragon. The enemy stepped closer to Han Jae-woo. "There's something different about you," she mused. "Your life energy. It comes from another dimension." Kururak quickly stepped in front of Han Jae-woo, declaring, "I will protect my master." But the enemy snapped, "I've had enough of your arrogance and insolence. I'll kill you right here, right now." Han Jae-woo quickly interjected, "Hear me out first." The enemy had no intention of listening, so the protagonist declared, "If I die, you die too." That bold claim made her halt her attack. "What are you talking about?" she demanded. As she pressed him for an explanation, Han Jae-woo revealed, "I sometimes have prophetic dreams, and in one of them I saw you. Not only that," he continued, "but in my dream, the demon dragon suffered a horrible death." The story didn't sound very convincing, but Han Jae-woo challenged, "If you don't believe me, read my memories and see for yourself." She reached for his head to read his memories, only to accidentally prick him with her sharp claws. Taking a moment, she declared, "I'll try something, but if you're lying," she warned, "you will die." After her threat, she retracted her claws and concentrated to delve into Han Jae-woo's mind. But the moment she plunged in, she was overcome by a strange sensation. Inside, she saw a chaotic torrent of things she couldn't possibly comprehend. Han Jae-woo's voice echoed in her thoughts, "Ignore that. Focus on what matters." But despite his warning, her curiosity pulled her towards other sights. To prevent her from seeing too much, Han Jae-woo immediately projected the specific vision he wanted her to witness. The adversary found it suspicious, but trapped within his mind, she had little choice. A moment later, she saw it, herself in her true dragon form. Then she realized the protagonist hadn't been lying. That single glimpse was enough to confirm his story. With a gasp, she pulled herself out of Han Jae-woo's mind. Meanwhile, the protagonist thought to himself, "Phew, she almost saw more than she should have." Still visibly shaken, the demon dragon murmured, Who could be strong enough to kill me?" "Regardless," she declared, "I'll leave you in peace. You may do as you please in these mountains." Wait, but Han Jae-woo countered, "I'd like to make a deal with you. First though, your name is far too long, so from now on, I'll call you Shubi." She clearly didn't like that idea one bit. Han Jae-woo reassured Shubi, "You can survive," but she still refused the name, huffing, "I am thousands of years old." Regardless, the protagonist insisted, "Just listen to my proposal." Suddenly, Han Jae-woo's system chimed. New mission, gain the dragon's trust. Difficulty, high. Sometime later, a snake slithered through the trees, only to be unceremoniously crushed by a passing foot. He proclaimed himself, "I am the master of the deep, dark abyss, the king of chaos and disorder. My name is Odgash, the demon king." Just as he finished his grand introduction, his servant interjected, "My lord, we're almost at our destination. We cannot stop now." But Odgash scoffed, "I am making my triumphant entry. I do not tolerate interruptions." His servant quickly apologized apologized, but Odgash waved him off. "Forget it, you've ruined the mood anyway." Just then, a woman appeared, her voice sharp. "That servant belongs to me," she declared, "not the Demon King." Odgash chuckled. "Ah, Calione, you finally arrived, my daughter," he added. "As promised, once this campaign concludes successfully, I shall grant your greatest wish." Even when Calione insisted she didn't need it, Odgash smiled. "As your father, it's only natural for me to do so." He then addressed his servants. "Gross Glockner is guarded by the demon dragon. The beasts under her control are nothing special, but the demon dragon herself will not be an easy foe. Still, do not fear. All you need to do is devour everything in sight and crush every living thing mercilessly beneath your feet." Finally, Odgash bellowed, "With my leadership, your victory is guaranteed." Now that his villainous children were sufficiently motivated, he was ready to move towards their objective. Back to our protagonist, he gathers his servants. He tells them that despite being disturbed by strange creatures and a dragon with communication issues, their mission is to collect as many valuable herbs as possible to bring back to Dresden. With that, he orders all the goblins to get back to work. After this motivating speech, Kururak serves his master a mandragora drink. As he sips, the protagonist muses that encountering a dragon so suddenly in a place like this would have been far more dangerous if he didn't have memories from previous playthroughs. Despite that, he thinks this run is quite different from the others, from Philip's altered behavior to the dragon's appearance. And speaking of appearances, he can't forget Valpurgis, who finally revealed her face to him. Next, he decides to check a few details using his system. As he suspected, the protagonist realizes this isn't the first time something like this has happened. Everything that's occurred so far is different from the previous run. Therefore, he concludes that what's to come might also be completely new. Han Jae-woo remembers almost every map in Gross Glockner, even every single stone, so he thinks it makes no sense to be confused about the dragon's drawing locations. Something is definitely wrong here. The battle for Harfaim between the Steel Elector and Pahamut, the betrayal of Friedrich, the Steel Elector's aid, and the crisis at Valpurgis's Grand Convent. The main scenarios are all the same, but the events are different. Yet the protagonist can't quite pinpoint what's different. Is he forgetting something important? His thoughts are interrupted by a commotion among the goblins. The protagonist tries to understand what's happening. One of the goblins says he merely hurt himself while gathering plants. Han Jae-woo warns them to be careful, explaining that some roots are dangerous, which is why he correctly instructed them on how to extract the plants. After that, he tries to resume his train of thought, but then he notices something. The injured goblin has a brother. Pausing to think, he remembers Charlotte and her younger sister, a detail he'd only encountered in this current run. Suddenly, the protagonist has an insight. All the events of the current run flash through his mind. He concludes that once his position changed, his perspective changed along with it. In the past, he was known as the Steel Elector, the leader of an empire, and even the hero who saved the world. He had extraordinary abilities to match his titles, but now he's just a simple mercenary. Nothing compared to his previous characters. All he has left from his earlier journeys are the memories. On the other hand, the protagonist thinks he did something different this time around. He managed to form connections with characters who were once mere NPCs in his journey. Just seeing Valpurgis's face made it all worthwhile. In his previous journey, Han Jae-woo would have simply paid Valpurgis's debt and moved on. He hadn't known the circumstances until now. Amidst this reflection, the protagonist finally realizes that things began to change after his encounter with Aquila. Precisely at the moment she presented the missing piece of the puzzle for him to discover the game's true ending. A new mysterious space was created, and with it, a new character for him was created. Now things are starting to make more sense to the protagonist, as he perceives that Aquila is behind all of this. Noticing his master acting strangely, Kururak asks if the drink isn't to his liking, but then a loud bang echoes nearby. Shubi appears, proclaiming that everything the protagonist said was true. Han Jae-woo states that this is all thanks to Aquila. The demon dragon doesn't understand what that means, but he continues, explaining that Aquila has made this game even more interesting than it already was. Shubi still says she didn't understand a single word he said. Regardless, Han Jae-woo declares that he will show Aquila he knows how to enjoy this world. From now on, he'll do whatever he wants, because a new strategy is beginning right now. Watching the protagonist behave like this leaves everyone else utterly confused. Back to the Demon King Odgash. He's destroying the scenery around him, a raw display of his immense power. His entire army cheers him on, glorifying his might. Suddenly, his daughter speaks, sensing something approaching. Is it the demon dragon? Odgash questions, but as he spots the approaching figures, Odgash scoffs, just a human and a goblin. However, his daughter quickly corrects him. They're not the only ones approaching. Then, a massive roar echoes. Odgash's eyes light up, thrilled, for finally, what he'd been waiting for appears before him. Shubi glares at Odgash and his army, demanding they they vacate her territory. Odgash, in turn, claims he's waited a long time for this, and he's here specifically for her. He even tries to present a tempting proposal, but Shubi rejects it outright. She glances at the protagonist. He's given her the signal. She prepares for battle, daring her enemy to attack. Odgash realizes he'd been talking to himself the entire time. His opponent hadn't even listened to a word he said. Swiftly, Shubi carries Odgash away, leaving the rest to the protagonist. Han Jae-woo had anticipated Odgash's invasion, but it's happening much sooner than last time. He could simply ignore him, but the demon dragon will be useful later, and he can't let her die now. Besides, the continent's greatest beauty, Lady Calione, stands before him. This is an honor indeed. She then removes her helmet and steps forward, leading her army. Seeing her like this, the protagonist remembers something vital. Depending on player choices, Calione is the highest risk character, capable of becoming either an ally or an enemy, but she's even stronger than Bahamut. They don't call her the Ice Queen for nothing. He absolutely needs to recruit her for his future strategy, no matter what. Seizing the opportunity, Han Jae-woo tells Calione, "You're even more beautiful in person." However, he promptly finds a spear at his throat. A servant and Calione both threaten him. Sarcastically, the protagonist deadpans, "My desire is to speak with the princess. Perhaps you can arrange a meeting?" Enraged, the princess's servant attacks him. Concerned for his master, Kururak leaps to the front of the battle. Han Jae-woo muses, "My favorite goblin is incredibly loyal to me." Kururak declares to the enemy, "If you want my master, you'll have to go through me first." The protagonist observes that this goblin is quite different from when he fled alone during Shubi's attack. Back to the fight, Han Jae-woo taunts the princess, "My servant is far more loyal than yours." Then, a whip lashes out, enveloping the enemy completely. On the other side, Hexax appears, a vampire controlled by Han Jae-woo. He had obviously saved her for just such an occasion, and now he's unleashed his servant to fight this foe. But Hexax wasn't the only one summoned to fight the Dark Nun. Piffenheim has joined the battle too. She vows, "I'll cut down anyone who dares to attack my master." Calione realizes the protagonist is controlling vampires at his whim. On his side, a vast army of the reborn stands ready. On hers, a multitude of monsters. The princess acknowledges her adversary possesses a powerful network of allies. However, she counters, "Beside me stands a legion of demons, loyal to Lord Odgash." Addressing all her troops, Calione commands, "Attack the enemy! Leave no one alive!" With her command, Calione's forces charge, and from the protagonist's side, his reborn servants surge forward as well. The masters themselves don't stay out of the fray, and immediately, they clash. Calione manages to push the protagonist back. She declares that not just anyone can block her attacks, placing him above Bahamut himself. Han Jae-woo admits that having his strength recognized by the princess is an honor, but he expresses regret that she's loyal to Odgash, adding that if her true father knew, he'd weep tears of blood. The protagonist knows she is Lady Calione Raminia Kaimars, the only daughter of the former level 1 demon lord, Kaimars. Calione in turn asks, "What else do you know?" The protagonist starts to laugh, prompting her to demand, "Why are you laughing?" Han Jae-woo finds it amusing that she's become so ignorant as to follow in the footsteps of the very one who defeated her own father. Calione, however, is stunned and confused by this information. "What are you talking about?" she demands. For Calione, her father was the most respected person in the world. She always cherished the warmth in his gaze, as it brought her a deep sense of peace and inspired other demons to believe in themselves. Calione was immensely proud of her father. He was her very own source of happiness, but everything ended when he died. Kaimars was tragically killed by Gorakalgam and Kaltus. It was then that Odgash adopted her. At the time, he claimed to hate the other demons just as much as she did. Lord Kaimars, he said, wasn't just his soul and true master, but also his best friend. Odgash spoke of a new beginning, promising that when the time was right, he'd help her achieve vengeance. Back in the present, Calione was indignant, hearing the protagonist insult her master. Han Jae-woo declared that she was truly in a terrible situation, but he urged her to take a look at an item first. He then tossed an energy sphere to Calione. Meanwhile, Odgash faced the demon dragon, declaring that romance was the only way. He saw this entire situation as some kind of twisted romantic epic. Shubi, in turn, accused him of doing great harm to Calione. Odgash, however, retorted that he wasn't the one who killed Kaimars. Gorokalgam and Kaltus were the true culprits. But Shubi scoffed, refusing to believe his excuses, because she knew the real story. Odgash called his adversary persistent, but then conceded, "You're right. After all, there's no way those two idiots could have killed Kaimars." With that, he finally admitted his true actions. He confessed that when those two discovered he knew Kaimar's only weakness, they practically drooled at the opportunity. Little did Odgash know that Calione was listening to every word. The sphere the protagonist had thrown her was, in fact, an image transmitter. Confronted with the truth, Calione went into shock. Ever since losing her father, she had regarded Odgash as her paternal figure. The protagonist realized his plan was working. Earlier, Han Jae-woo had coordinated everything with Shubi, and the magical projector had come from her. He'd asked Shubi to use it during the battle, wanting Odgash to confess everything he'd done while fighting her. Shubi hadn't understood why, but Han Jae-woo insisted it was crucial for the plan. Back in the present, Calione had stopped fighting, deep in thought about what she'd just heard. The protagonist mused that Shubi had done exactly as agreed, which was why the plan worked. Now the rest was up to him. Crying, Calione uttered that everything she believed to be true was nothing more than an act by Odgash. She remembered that Odgash had always been by her side since childhood. Amidst this, Hexax announced that her work was done. The protagonist simply told her to hold her position. Defeated, Calione confessed she never imagined she'd obeyed her true enemy for 50 years. She was utterly devastated by the revelation. The protagonist then suggested that instead of lamenting, she could claim her long-sought vengeance. From this moment on, he offered to teach her Kaimar's right of the true name. What Calione would do with it would be entirely up to her. Calione gasped. It's been so long since I heard about that. A spell that borrows the vast power of the cosmos, strong enough to wound even an archdemon. It was that spell that made her father the greatest demon lord. But she quickly added that only her father knew those details, so how could a stranger possibly know? Han Jae-woo mused that he'd studied everything, cover to cover, thanks to the strategy guide, which meant he knew Kaimar's inside and out, the overwhelming power of the right, his true name, and even his single fatal weakness. But for now, he just needed to tell Calione a story that would persuade her. The protagonist explained that he had read the chronicles of the 7 Demon Wars, which detailed methods to resist the archdemon. Among them was Kaimar's right of the true name, which had proven incredibly useful. Calione admitted that makes sense, which pleased the protagonist, but she then stated she couldn't help him defeat Odgash because he was an immortal. She recounted that before he became her father's subordinate, Odgash suffered a direct impact from that very spell, leaving him incapacitated for a time, but her father couldn't finish him. However, the protagonist countered that she was gravely mistaken. He pointed out that the comrades protecting her were part of his vampire army, and no matter how strong Calione was, she couldn't face so many alone. Han Jae-woo offered himself as her new ally. "Will you follow me?" he asked, "or die right here?" At this, Calione became emotional. She remembered her childhood, telling her father that when she grew up, she wanted to become a great demon lord like him. Her father had said that if she was serious, she'd have to become even stronger than him. Calione had asked if that was even possible. Her father had said yes, that he believed in her. After all, she was his daughter. Back in the present, she tearfully asked the protagonist, "Can I truly defeat Odgash?" Han Jae-woo didn't understand why she asked this while crying. Even his allies found it surprising. But Piffenheim noted that in demon years, Calione was just a child. Kururak, meanwhile, wondered if his master had forgotten about their other problem. Not far away, Odgash was still battling Shubi. But despite facing a powerful adversary, he felt no fatigue or difficulty. He claimed to be disappointed, as he'd expected more from his opponent. Shubi, however, scorned his provocation, ready to continue fighting. Shubi was tasked with distracting the enemy, but Odgash was disappointed when she avoided a direct confrontation. Not only that, her adversary had expected her to accept his offer. Instead of allying with him, Shubi rebuffs Odgash, unleashing her powerful dragon's breath. But despite the strength of her attack, she couldn't defeat him easily. Odgash was stronger than expected. He not only defended, but also counterattacked, feeling confident in front of his foe. "If a fight is what you want," he declared, "I'll grant your wish." He then lunged at Shubi with incredible speed, slamming her to the ground. After taking the hit, Shubi vowed revenge. She underwent her true transformation, attacking Odgash in her full dragon form. The impact caused an earthquake. Meanwhile, the protagonist tells Kururak, "Be careful where you step." Hexax, watching their interaction, finds it incredibly cute. She sees the goblin as the protagonist's pet. Piffenheim approaches her master, noting, "Shubi's mana is surging. She's even breaking through the polymorph," he observes. But his ally still wonders, can someone like Lady Shubi truly withstand this enemy? Han Jae-woo points out that the battles in Grossglockner are a massive strain on Shubi. Then, an idea strikes him. He calls out to Calione, declaring he has an important mission for her. "Do you accept the challenge?" he asks. Without hesitation, she replies, "Yes." Nearby, Odgash fiercely fights the dragon. Shubi tries to strike, but Odgash gives her no quarter. "I'm truly enjoying this test of strength," he boasts. Shubi unleashes her fiery breath, yet Odgash effortlessly defends himself. Realizing this, Shubi intensifies her attacks, finally landing a powerful blow and causing significant damage. But Odgash claims it's still not enough to defeat him, demanding more to satisfy his battle lust. Shubi calls her adversary arrogant, asserting she isn't even using her full power. If I were, she warns, a planetary collapse would be nothing compared to my attacks. Odgash remains unfazed. He, in turn, states he also has tricks up his sleeve. With his axe, he strikes Shubi. The blow is so powerful it sends her flying, causing massive devastation to the landscape. Afterwards, Odgash declares, I didn't expect a demon dragon to be so pathetic. I never expected to defeat her this easily. After that crushing blow, Shubi reverted to her weaker form. Odgash approaches, revealing, I've discovered the reason for your weakness, Shubi. You're trapped in this very place. I'm curious why. But instead of answering, Shubi scorns her enemy. Odgash concedes, you're unyielding to the very end. But now, you'll meet your end. However, before Odgash can strike Shubi, the protagonist appears, stopping him dead in his tracks and striking Odgash. Shubi sighs in relief that he finally appeared, but adds, You're late. Han Jae-woo retorts, You look awful, a comment Shubi certainly doesn't appreciate. Odgash rises and seeing the protagonist demands, What happened to Calione? Han Jae-woo simply replies, You'll find out soon enough. After that, he gives the girl a signal. Calione descends from the skies asking, Odgash, didn't you forget to tell me something? Seeing Calione, Odgash declares that she's finally mastered the right of true naming. He tells her to use that magic against the protagonist. But the protagonist has heard enough. He urges Calione to swiftly deal with her father's murderer. Odgash, however, claims he has no idea what they're talking about, insisting Kamar's was his best friend and he'd never harm him. Shubi steps forward, confronting the enemy with the truth. She reveals that everything Odgash said has already been transmitted, meaning Calione knows all the facts. At this, Odgash completely loses it, exclaiming that his enemies are conspiring against him. Han Jae-woo tells Shuni to trap Odgash before he can escape. Shuni uses her territorial influence to bind the enemy with powerful roots. Not only that, but a magical seal is also invoked around him. Odgash remains unfazed, declaring they can all attack him together if they wish. Calione is the first to strike, unleashing her magic against her former ally. Her heart seethes with hatred, and she pours all her rage into the assault. Odgash takes the full brunt of the magical onslaught. Afterward, Calione feels utterly drained, having poured so much energy into that one attack. The enemy, however, is in far worse shape, having taken the full force impact. Remembering her father, Calione starts to get emotional again, but she barely has time for it. The enemy is already getting back up, catching her completely by surprise. The protagonist decides to attack, refusing to let Calione remain the enemy's target. Odgash, however, absolutely hates being wounded by a human, but his rage doesn't help him much. After capturing the enemy's attention, Han Jae-woo uses Odgash's own horn as a weapon against him. He declares this is the only way to kill an immortal, by using a part of the target's own body against them. With this precise, devastating blow, he finally defeats the enemy. Immediately, his system alerts him to the rewards he's earned from this victory. Meanwhile, Shubi casts healing magic on Calione. She tells her that she barely survived, having expended too much mana on her attack, but at least the enemy has been defeated. Now that it's all over, Calione isn't sure what to do with her life. However, the protagonist invites her to join his party. With that, Calione realizes she's finally found a place to belong after all. A short while later, Marin, the guild leader's daughter, is awake. She complains that the medicine is incredibly bitter, but her father insists she must drink it anyway. After all, Lord Valor and his companions risked their lives to bring it from so far away. Marin asks if, once she drinks it all, her father will grant her wish. Her father says yes. Meanwhile, the protagonist asks about their agreement, but the guild leader tells them to discuss business where his daughter can't hear. In private, the protagonist asks if the guild leader has resolved the debt issue. The guild leader replies that there's strong opposition from the debtors. Why are they making such a fuss? The protagonist asks. The guild leader explains it's likely because of the Elector of Saxony. Previously, the Elector met with the guild master, stating that the debtors were VIP clients who spent a lot of money with him, and thus he didn't agree with their arrangement. He also mentioned that both their guilds had been allies for some time, so if the merchant simply arranged a meeting for the Elector of Saxony, he promised he could turn the situation around. Han Jae-woo realizes they're causing all this commotion because they fear the merchant's connection to Saxony will disappear if the debt is settled. To the protagonist, it's no wonder those bastards bastards from Lighter were acting so recklessly. If it had just been a confrontation between the Emperor and the House of Bayern, it would have been a balanced fight. But including the Elector of Saxony in this makes the situation much, much worse. He then understands it's no wonder Valpurgis is so worried and tries to think of a solution to help her. Seeing the protagonist's concern, the merchant suggests trying another alternative for this deadlock. However, Han Jae-woo presses the merchant, asking, "Are you good at negotiations?" Elsewhere, at a noble's estate, he receives the news that Saxony intends to side against them. The noble laments that if his family had recognized the debt transfer, they would have extended the payment deadline. But now, he cries, "we don't even have that!" The messenger states that from their end, there was nothing more they could do. So, the noble instructs his servant to go to the capital immediately, even if he has to grab onto the emperor's coattails. He affirms that he must resolve this matter by any means necessary and return with everything settled. At another point, the protagonist's system alerts him that his summon undead skill proficiency has increased. Now, he can summon his allies both day and night. To test this, the protagonist calls for Piffenheim. Immediately, she appears in broad daylight without any issues. Han Jae-woo declares that she and the other vampires have now become true daywalkers. Therefore, he assigns her a special mission. The protagonist reveals a document instructing his ally to deliver it to a man named Reeb Saltz. He emphasizes that this document is special, so she must be careful when handing it over. Shortly after, the guildmaster appears, announcing that everything Lord Valor requested for his departure is ready. He presents a magnificent carriage crafted by a master artisan, claiming that only a select few nobles possess such a luxury. He managed to acquire it through an acquaintance at a client's company. He also included payment for herbs and some travel money, so Valor should have more than enough. However, he can't help but ask, "What exactly do you plan to do with such a grand luxury item?" Han Jae-woo smirks. "Perhaps I'll use it to bash the heads of those who opposed our agreement." Marin then appears to bid them farewell. The protagonist advises her that despite being healthier, she still needs to be careful for a while. In turn, the young girl declares she has something for Valor. Then, she surprises him with a kiss on the cheek. Not just the protagonist, but everyone around is stunned by her bold gesture. Marin explains, "That's a thank you gift." After their farewells, the girl and her father head home. Along the way, Marin reminds her father of his promise to grant her a wish. Then she declares, "My wish is to become Lord Valor's bride." She explains that she was enchanted by him after meeting him. Her father, however, is not at all pleased with this turn of events. Meanwhile, far away, the protagonist and his group continue on their journey. Calione comments that Marin is indeed a warrior, expressing her surprise that she would try to win the protagonist over with such a bold move. Still, she adds that Lord Valor seems to care more about money than anything else. Han Jae-woo retorts that they simply don't understand. He insists that's how the world works. It revolves around money. But seeing the disapproving gaze of Calione's nuns, he quickly grows uncomfortable. Luckily for him, he receives a call from Kubalt, who heard that Valor had returned from Gross Glockner and is thrilled to know he survived. The protagonist assures him he's perfectly fine and continues his mission. "By the way," Kubalt asks, "have the enemies left already?" His ravens discovered the departure immediately, which is why he's contacting him. The information just arrived. Han Jae-woo responds, "That was quick. What did you find out?" Kubalt replies that things are unfolding exactly as Valor predicted. Indeed, the enemies departed for the capital this morning, and they seemed incredibly irritated. The protagonist admits that he's partly to blame for that. He then hints, and there are still more surprises to come. Kubalt adds that apparently, Roland, the Rose Demoness, is currently in the capital. In that case, the protagonist asks him to spread a rumor in the capital. Kubalt remarks, "You're as meticulous as ever." Han Jae-woo replies that their alliance is precisely for this kind of work. Kubalt acknowledges, promising to reward him well, but then declares he wants to end the call now. The protagonist teases, "You don't need to be so embarrassed." His ally, trusting him, simply says, "I'll trust you. I'm hanging up now." After the call ends, the protagonist realizes he accidentally said something embarrassing. In turn, Calione is surprised to see the protagonist conversing with Kubalt of Plulzen, noting that his connections are far wider than she had imagined. Speaking of which, the protagonist declares he has an idea. Embarrassed, Calione asks, "Why are you looking at me like that?" Han Jae-woo reassures her, simply stating that she needs to do something for the good of the team. Sometime later, in Vienna, the capital of the empire, people stroll through the streets chattering about recent rumors. Kaimars's daughter is said to be visiting the city. The news that Odgash killed her father, only to die by her hands, is also being discussed. The gossips even claim Kaimar's daughter used her family's secret technique against the enemy. What's more, the rumors all agree her beauty is is absolutely stunning. Amidst this buzz, the protagonist's carriage arrives, and everyone immediately assumes it's Kaimar's daughter. Embarrassed, Caleone asks the protagonist, "Is this really necessary?" He replies with a firm yes. He claims Caleone's face is a strategic weapon. Caleone counters that the only weapons she knows are swords and battle axes. But he scolds her. Someone in such a beautiful dress shouldn't say such crude things. The girl admits she doesn't like being the center of attention and feels incredibly uncomfortable with so many people waiting for her. Not to mention, she doesn't even know how to behave formally. Han Jae-woo assures her, "It's easy. Just keep one hand gracefully resting on your cheek and the other hand gently placed over your folded knees. Along with that, you just need to put on the most enchanting expression you can muster. Do that and you'll be fine." Irritated, Caleone retorts that the protagonist knows perfectly well she's a commander, a leader of an army. She usually wears battle armor, not dresses. "Doing what you're asking will utterly destroy my reputation as a commander," she exclaims. However, the protagonist calmly states that she has total freedom to leave his team and follow her own path. "But if you want to stay," he warns, "you have to play by my rules." Cornered, Caleone has no choice. She does as instructed, placing one hand gracefully on her cheek and the other over her folded knees. And then she does the most important thing. She puts on the most enchanting expression, one that highlights her breathtaking beauty. When they see her, everyone's jaws drop. Even though she's embarrassed, Caleone maintains her pose. It doesn't take long for her to be acclaimed by all the men in the city. Unaccustomed to such a warm reception, Caleone becomes truly startled by the public's overwhelming reaction. Not far from there, Roland gathers her staff. She announces that she is expecting a very important visitor. She expresses her deep regret that this isn't her Rose Palace because, to her, this person is more important than the Emperor himself, more important than any demon lord. So, she relies on all her staff for help. To the chefs, she demands they prepare the most delicious meal they've ever made in their careers. And to the maids, she instructs them to make this place cleaner and more beautiful than the Rose Palace itself. One of her attendants approaches, announcing that the visitor's arrival is imminent. Roland then tells everyone to give it their absolute best. "This is the most important day of my life," she exclaims. Meanwhile, she thinks to herself, "I'm doing all this for my Lord Kaimar's." Roland's beauty and voice enchanted every man's heart. This made her the envy of all demons, but her true nature was far more complex. With her eloquent speech, she wielded diplomacy as a weapon, transforming Roserant into a powerful nation. This is how she became known as the Bride of Roserant. But there was a secret people didn't know, the true story behind her crown. Once, she approached Kaimar's, telling him he was the only one to whom she could truly open her heart. Roland believed her heart would never change, so she pleaded for him to accept her. But little Caleone suddenly interrupted their conversation, asking her father, "Who is this beautiful lady?" Her father simply said she was a colleague. So Caleone presented Roland with a gift, explaining that she'd made it with her uncle Odgash. "Since you're so pretty," Caleone added, "I'll give you the best cookies I made." That's when Roland understood Kaimar's refusal. His heart was already taken by someone else. Afterwards, she approached Princess Caleone, asking if, one day, she might ask the girl to choose a name for a castle of her own. "It would be a true honor if Lady Caleone chose the name for my castle." Inspired by Roland's radiant beauty, the princess suggested the name, the Palace of Roses. Roland loved the name, and true to her word, later built a magnificent castle bearing the princess's suggestion. Back in the present, Roland and Caleone finally reunited. "Since Lord Kaimar's is no longer with us," she began, "I made it my priority to see his only blood relative, his daughter," and with that, she gracefully knelt before the princess. Caleone was clearly impressed by the elaborate reception prepared for her. "Oh, if only we were at the Palace of Roses," Roland lamented. "I could have offered a far more splendid meal," but Caleone assured her that what stood before her was more than enough. Roland also offered her gratitude to Lord Valor for bringing back the princess, the one everyone believed to be dead. "I've heard from Count Nider Bayern," she continued, "that Valor always overcomes difficulties in the most unusual ways." She even mentioned a peculiar connection between them, but the protagonist quickly steered the conversation to other matters. Roland sighed regretfully. "I do enjoy a good love story, but since you insist," she conceded, "we can certainly begin discussing business." The protagonist revealed the true reason for his visit, to deliver a message from Philip, the Elector of Steel. Roland felt a wave of relief knowing Philip was alive, but immediately asked, "Can I see him in person?" Han Jae-woo shook his head. "Unfortunately, that won't be possible. Philip is not in a condition to receive visitors right now." "In that case," Roland said, "let's get straight to the point." The protagonist relayed Philip's message. "He cannot act publicly at this time. Therefore, he has appointed Valorstead Valor as his proxy, with full powers, and he requests your aid, Roland, in recovering the Pulse in the near future. Even if I have to lie for now, I need to win Roland over. She has to be my ally." Judging by the fact that Margareta was under the curse of he who squats in the grave, It's clear Pedzimit is also receiving support from the Great Lord. Margarita alone won't be enough to defeat him. I can't personally kill someone under the protection of the Great Lord. That's why recruiting Roland is essential. With her by my side, I can put Pizamut in his place. With that, Han Jae-woo concluded Philip's message. Roland had listened to the entire message with rapt attention. But to agree, she stated, I have one condition. She explained that Lord Valor must already know her current situation. The protagonist deduced she was referring to the economic blockade. Therefore, Roland pressed, if Lord Valor truly represents His Highness, the Emperor cannot ignore your words. Han Jae-woo simply told her not to worry about that. The tables are already set, he assured her. Meanwhile, at the Imperial Palace, a frantic servant was pleading for His Majesty's help, only to have his appeal flatly rejected. Emperor Franz IV simply declared, I regret this. He claimed that as soon as he heard the circumstances, his heart had softened. Yet the servant insisted there had to be some kind of order for this situation. The Emperor, who barely bothered to hide the piles of gold surrounding his throne, remained firm in his decision. Despite the debt agreement, he stated, they were kind enough to bring a small tribute to the Empire. Besides, he added, I hear the Valia Merchants Guild is supporting the debtors, and the servant tasked by his master to convince the Emperor to prevent the agreement now found himself utterly lost. He would have to face his master and admit he had failed. Just then, one of the Emperor's soldiers appeared. Lord Valor has just arrived, Your Majesty. The Emperor immediately authorized his entrance. As he stepped into the palace, the protagonist declared, It's a great honor to stand before Your Majesty. Introducing himself as Valorstead Valor, he stated he was at the Empire's service. I was expecting you, the Emperor said, and pay no mind to this man here. He's merely a messenger boy, he dismissed. Still, the protagonist requested to speak with the Emperor alone. Reluctantly, His Majesty agreed. The noble's envoy was immediately escorted from the palace, but instead of leaving with dignity, he pleaded for the Emperor to reconsider. It was no use. To make matters worse, as the man was dragged away, the protagonist smiled, waving goodbye. This left the young man absolutely seething with indignation. Far from the capital in Odgash's castle, the demons, defeated in battle, recounted their tale to Odgash's furious daughter. She was absolutely furious. She reminded them she had asked to go along. If I had been there, she seethed, I would have handled things far better than Calione. Amidst her rage, a servant appeared with urgent news, but she was far too angry to listen. Your ladyship, the servant pressed, the Emperor has just decreed an economic blockade on our region. She looked confused. Diplomatic matters weren't her strong suit. The servant, worried about her reaction, also seemed a bit confused. What does that really mean? She finally asked. Back to our protagonist, he's finally alone with the Emperor. Han Jae-woo remarks that looking at the capital's prosperous scenery, he can't help but feel the magnificent achievements of His Majesty. He almost feels worthy of having stepped foot here, but the Emperor tells him to set aside formalities. The Emperor thinks that in the short time since Valor entered politics, he's managed to use Kaimars's daughter to soften anti-demon sentiment in crucial regions. He even turned them into allies. So he concludes that Valor is here for a reason too, and he wants to know what it is. However, he believes Valor is merely a mouse facing a predator, probably thinking he can win everything with mere words. Yet, in his arrogance, the Emperor doesn't believe he'll be outmaneuvered by a newly appointed hero. So, he asks our protagonist, what do you really want to say? In response, our protagonist humbly asks that the economic blockade on Roserant be transferred to the domain of Odgash, the Demon King. The Emperor wants to know what he'd gain from this, as a simple friendship treaty with the Rose Kingdom doesn't seem like enough. What's more, he claims that ancient Black Widow, Roland, is not of his interest. However, the protagonist asserts that she will do everything His Majesty orders. He reveals a document to the Emperor, which immediately piques His Majesty's curiosity. The document states that Roland herself has agreed to pay 10,000 florins annually. Not only that, but the Emperor asks our protagonist, is there any proof this document is authentic? Han Jae-woo explains that Odgash is currently the most despised villain on the entire continent. So if the Emperor blocks the Demon King's domain, he'll be praised by the entire world. The Emperor admits that Calione is indeed intriguing. But even so, he believes there isn't enough justification, claiming that politics isn't a game of emotion. An irritated Valor thinks to himself, the Emperor didn't say that when Roserant was blocked just because Roland refused to pay tribute. But then he speaks again. Odgash perished in the recent Great War. His followers are now preparing to declare war on the demonic dragon. The seeds of conflict haven't been uprooted, and the Empire's citizens are terrified. Therefore, it's time to make a decision. The Emperor comments that Valor certainly has the gift of words. He could convince him of anything. anything. Han Jae-woo thanks him, but internally knows he has no such gift. In truth, he possesses a convincing ability. Valor states his desire is simply to repay His Majesty's grace with a small token of loyalty. However, this infuriates the Emperor. He declares he would never be fooled by such sweet, comforting lies. He then demands, does Valor dare test the patience of the one who rules this entire continent? Immediately after, he orders his guards to remove Valor from his sight. Our protagonist doesn't understand how this happened, wondering, why is the Emperor doing this all of a sudden? Sometime later, at Roland's party, Caleone feels awkward, watching her servants eat heartily while she's the only one not enjoying herself. Even the Emperor is having a blast, declaring he's never had such a pleasant conversation as he had with Lord Valor. Our protagonist himself can't quite understand the Emperor's sudden change of heart, but the Emperor declares that from now on, Valor can call him Uncle. He won't accept any more formal titles. Han Jae-woo decides to play along, calling him Uncle. The Emperor beams, saying it's much better this way, far more pleasant to his ears. Outside, the servant who was expelled from the palace is absolutely seething with envy, seeing the Emperor so close to Valor. He rages, claiming this position should be his. He simply can't comprehend how Valor succeeded where he failed. Suddenly, one of his allies speaks up, asking, "Why kidnap Valpurgis?" Another hooded figure chimes in, warning that it's far too dangerous, suggesting they consider other options. But the leader of the conspirators retorts that it's not out of the question. If they don't do what needs to be done, their entire family could be ruined. So he insists they act cautiously, yet precisely. Back with our protagonist, he finally retreats to his room, utterly exhausted. Caleone remarks that's what happens when you drink everything offered to you. Han Jae-woo chuckles, calling it socializing. He claims that in his day, he could handle 7 rounds of drinks, but now he just wants to rest. However, Kubalt calls him almost immediately, saying something terrible has happened. Our protagonist, groaning about a headache, tries to hang up, but Kubalt insists it's no time for jokes. It's about Valpurgis, he warns, urging Valor to take the situation seriously. At that exact moment, in Odgash Castle, the Demon King's daughter declares there's no time for hesitation. She wants to avenge her father immediately. She is Margaret Von Tash, and she swears that to avenge her father, she'll devour even the demonic dragon itself if she has to. She commands all warriors fit for battle to prepare for war. She orders them to train intensely without rest until everyone is ready. As soon as possible, she wants to head to Gross Glockner. The princess's servant suggests it might be better not to act so rashly. He explains that the Emperor has already declared an economic blockade there, and recently Valpurgis even brought St. Margaret back to life. Furthermore, the blockade on Rosarant has been lifted, so Roland won't stay silent either, which only makes things worse for them. Therefore, he urges them to act cautiously when executing their plans. However, Margaret Von Tash remains unconvinced, declaring that nothing will stand in her way, especially not the weak. Meanwhile, Valpurgis finds herself trapped. "Why are you doing this?" she demands of her captors. The conspirator reveals their intention. "We aim to persuade the Emperor." He boasts about their fortress. "It has an iron defense surrounded by the lake. Even if the Bayerns attack, they'll struggle to bring it down." Ultimately, he concludes, there's no way our plan can fail. Valpurgis scoffs, calling them idiots for believing mere gates can protect them. Annoyed, the enemy snaps, "Silence! You're far too noisy for a hostage." "Are you waiting for that bastard Valor?" he sneers. The mere thought of the humiliation Valor inflicted on him fills him with even greater fury. Valpurgis retorts, "You'll face even greater humiliation once I'm free." "There's nothing you can do in your current state," the enemy counters. "You're all alone!" Suddenly, another conspirator bursts in, alerting them to an invasion. Outside, the protagonist group has already surrounded the area. Hexax reports, "All units, except Piffenheim, who's on a special mission, have gathered. We can attack at any moment." Even Kururak asks if he should join in. "Quiet, everyone," the protagonist commands. "Our mission is to rescue Valpurgis and annihilate Ritter. They've crossed every line imaginable." He adds, "I was willing to ignore them if they'd just stayed quiet. But now, I'll see this hunt through to the very end." With that, they storm the location. The protagonist tells Hexax, "I'll take this side, you go the other way." Kururak begs to go with his master, but Hexax interjects, "Actually, we're going together." Even the protagonist tells Kururak to go with Hexax and assist her. Kururak doesn't like the idea at all. He's terrified of Hexax. Han Jae-woo sighs, "I don't have time to deal with cowards. We need to act fast." Inside the captivity chamber, the captors watch the action unfold outside, but the lead conspirator is filled with hatred as he catches sight of the protagonist. He still craves his revenge. He grabs a sword, Just imagining what I'll do when I find him. It fills me with satisfaction, he mutters. With that, he charges directly towards his opponent. The leader of the Ritters tells the others not to let their ally go into battle alone. Meanwhile, Walpurgis realizes the protagonist has arrived to rescue her. She thinks to herself, he always rescues me. She remembers that ever since they met, he has always been by her side. But now, she's filled with rage at her own powerlessness. Walpurgis begins to tremble with fury, and through her rage, the pillar she's tied to starts to crack. Elsewhere, Ritter thinks to himself, everything was going according to plan until that servant interfered. I should have gone to the capital myself. Suddenly he hears a noise and is startled. Not only that, but he realizes the Countess of Bayerns has freed herself. He wonders, how did the paladin break through the reinforced barrier? But believing she can't fight without a sword, he feels confident enough to attack first. However, he's caught completely by surprise. Walpurgis not only counterattacks, but in doing so, shatters her opponent's sword. Ritter is worried, but he insists he won't lose this fight. In his arrogance, he takes a brutal right hook to the chin. He even loses a tooth in the process. Walpurgis declares, I can't keep depending on others forever. She intends to finish off the enemy on her own. Ritter tries to argue, but can barely speak. All he manages to stammer is that he wasn't even part of this plan. Walpurgis simply says she doesn't care. But before she can attack, Ritter screams, Monster! It's very rude to call a lady a monster, Walpurgis retorts. Suddenly, she spots something approaching. A real monster arrives on the scene. Ritter cackles. My monster has finally awakened. Now one monster will face another. He calls the brute Igor and commands him to protect him. Back with the protagonist, he asks, Am I going the right way? Yes, Kubalt replies. I'm observing through the familiars right now, and someone named Igor just appeared there. Igor is the human weapon they've been developing, he explains. He's the same one who caused that mass massacre at Ritter's castle. A truly brutal creature. Han Jae-woo frowns. That's not part of the game's original story. Just then, a voice calls out, Valor stead valor! The protagonist thanks Kubalt for the information, but says he has to hang up to deal with something. The conspirator from the Ritter family approaches. Finally, he snarls, I'll have my revenge. But as he provokes the protagonist, he fails to notice that his rear is completely unprotected. Instantly, a shadow summoned by the protagonist strikes him on the head. He's knocked out cold, face planting into the ground. Han Jae-woo mutters, What a waste of time, I need to hurry. Back with Igor, he attacks the paladin. Walpurgis defends herself in her own unique way. She deftly dodges his attacks, using her superior speed to her advantage. Then, she senses something familiar about Igor. Were you the one responsible for ambushing and dragging me here? She questions. Regardless, she declares, as a member of the Walpurga convent, I cannot let my guard down. Following this, Igor becomes even more enraged than before. Walpurgis doesn't understand this sudden change in his behavior. Ritter explains, The paladin spoke the forbidden word. Igor hates the Walpurga convent, he shouts. Now the Countess's problems have only gotten worse. At another moment, Margaret Vontash complained about the food and the camp. Her servant explained that their finances were in dire straits and would only improve if they rescued Lord Vontash. Things were so bad, they'd even had to sell their castle due to the economic blockade. Margaret asked about the army, and her servant reported they'd received partial pay and full medical treatment, but she retorted that they shouldn't be doing anything but training, despite her servant's plea for their medical needs. She claimed it was only because her father had spoiled all his servants. The servant murmured that things were better when Lord Odgash was around, until an irritated Margaret ordered him to serve her a real piece of meat. The story then flashes back to a young Igor, trying to join the Walpurga convent. One of the nuns told him that they proved their faith through physical endurance, and looking at the boy, she thought he could barely lift a weight, let alone exercise. Though she admired his dedication, his lack of strength was an obstacle, not to mention the fact that they only accepted women. It was, after all, a convent. Igor carries that resentment to this very day. Back in the present, he attacked Walpurga solely because she had mentioned his childhood trauma. Ritter burst out laughing, claiming that no one could stop Igor when he got angry. But then, Ritter himself became a target for also mentioning the convent's name. Walpurgis didn't understand why he hated the convent so much, but it was clear that his fists carried a deep sadness. Realizing she couldn't just dodge forever, she counterattacked, clashing her fists against his. Igor felt the force of her blow, which only fueled his rage further. He remembered his past, the nun's words repeating in his mind, and how he had resolved to train to become stronger. But due to the intense training regimen, he started losing more and more hair. A mark was left on his body, but in a way, he gained an enviable physique. Walpurgis attacked her opponent's abdomen, but couldn't inflict any damage. Then she struck his face, realizing she'd found a weak spot. After knocking him out, she declared that when Igor's fists no longer hesitated, she would face him again. However, seeing the fortress trembling, Walpurgis wondered if she had overdone it in the fight. Back to the protagonist, he also felt the tremors, wondering if it was an earthquake. Suddenly, the ceiling above him collapsed, nearly crushing him, but but he quickly used his magic sword, slicing through the stones before they could hit him. However, the fall of so much heavy material destroyed a good portion of the castle. His path was blocked, but the protagonist declared he had no time for this. Just then, Cobalt called him, saying Valpurgis was fine, but the location she was in was not. He sent a bat to serve as a guide, telling him to rescue his friend and get out of there fast. Meanwhile, Valpurgis believed Valor must be on his way and needed to find him quickly. After all, she wanted to tell him what she couldn't the last time. In that moment of distraction, a stone nearly hit her head, but just then, the protagonist arrived, cutting the stone in half. Valpurgis was overjoyed to see him again. Despite the perilous situation, the protagonist felt the same. However, he saw a fallen enemy and asked who it was. Cobalt's bat urgently interjected that they didn't have time for this. The place was about to collapse. So they ran, and Walpurgis was surprised that such a big guy could fit into a small glove. The protagonist had stored Igor in his inventory, unwilling to leave him behind. Though he didn't say it, Walpurgis knew that Lord Valor had a big heart. In the midst of their escape, she declared that she had something to reveal to him. Han Jae-woo suggested they could wait until they were safe, but the Countess insisted it was important. She then revealed that Walpurgis wasn't her real name. Her true name was Chartier. The protagonist remarked that it was a beautiful name, but then realized they might not escape in time. Val also noticed this, but was immediately hit by the collapsing debris. Han Jae-woo tried to do something about it, but he was also struck. The bat grew worried, but the protagonist announced he wasn't dead. Despite the ceiling collapsing, he had narrowly escaped, and so had Walpurgis. Both of them realized they were okay. Hexax approached, and the protagonist exclaimed that she had arrived at the perfect time. He then used her wings to fly away, trying to hold Valpurgis's hand. Just as Hexax stated that the entire place would collapse completely in 5 seconds, the protagonist desperately tried to pull her out of there as quickly as possible, but Walpurgis was having trouble holding his hand. Soon, the entire castle caved in, and a massive cloud of dust engulfed the area. However, everyone managed to get out in time. Not only that, but by revealing her true name to the protagonist, her affection for him had increased dramatically.